Tonight, I'm taking you through the complete story of Umbrella, from before the company even existed, when Oswald Spencer first encountered Miranda in the late 1940s, all the way through Umbrella's rise, its internal betrayals, the outbreaks that exposed it, its eventual collapse, and what came after: Tricell, Neo Umbrella, and Blue Umbrella. This is everything. Every major project, every key figure, every turning point across decades of history. This is a long one, so I'll be adding timestamps throughout. In the late 1940 decade, a young medical student named Oswald E. Spencer traveled through the rugged mountains of Eastern Europe. During this solitary hiking trip, he discovered a remote village ruled by a mysterious woman known as Mother Miranda. Spencer was immediately captivated by her absolute authority over the local population. He watched her manipulate a biological organism known as the megamycete to achieve a form of eternal life. This encounter provided the spiritual inspiration for his own pursuit of biological godhood. Spencer saw that Miranda had moved beyond the limits of traditional science to control the human body at a molecular level. However, he eventually disagreed with her narrow focus on a single family resurrection. Spencer envisioned a global evolution that would encompass the entire human species. He wanted to use biology as a tool for a new world order, where the strong ruled the weak. The village was the primary source of the dark ideology that would eventually define his career. The medical student eventually stole the four-winged crest from the local cemetery before his final departure. This ancient symbol represented the noble families that served the village mistress in the valley for centuries. Spencer repurposed this heraldic crest to become the official umbrella logo for his future corporation. He turned a tribal emblem into a global brand that would represent industrial death. The red and white umbrella was a silent tribute to the Eastern European ruins where he first found his purpose. The relationship between Spencer and Miranda was the foundational moment for the entire organization. He realized that the megamycete was a sign of a prehistoric power that could be harnessed by a modern pharmaceutical company. This belief led him to seek out other viral sources that could rewrite the genetic code of the masses. He left the village with a cold heart and a clear mission. He was ready to build a kingdom that would surpass the small valley of his mentor. Oswald E. Spencer eventually teamed up with two other individuals to realize his grand vision for the human race. The first was Edward Ashford, a man of aristocratic lineage and immense personal wealth. Ashford provided the social status and the massive funding required to launch a global enterprise. The second was James Marcus, a brilliant virologist with a cold passion for scientific discovery. Together, these three men formed the original foundation of the secret alliance during the 1960 decade. They were brought together by a shared eugenics dream that spanned several continents. They believed that modern humanity was a weak race that had reached a dead biological end. Their goal was to use advanced biology to evolve the human species into a superior form. They envisioned a world where disease and aging were obsolete, replaced by a viral perfection. This vision was the driving force behind their early research and their initial corporate expansion into the global market. The partnership was a union of money, power, and intellect. Spencer provided the leadership and the global vision for the project. Ashford brought the resources and the political connections from his long family history. Marcus was the engine of the scientific breakthroughs that made the dream possible in the lab. However, The alliance was built on a foundation of mutual distrust. Each founder possessed an ego that was too large to share the ultimate victory with his partners. This eugenics dream was the moral compass for the early organization. Every experiment and every lab was designed to serve the goal of human evolution through viral integration. They did not see themselves as terrorists or criminals in the traditional sense. They saw themselves as the saviors of a stagnant world. They were willing to sacrifice thousands of lives to achieve their biological leap. The founders were united by their deep contempt for the common man. Part 3. The 1966 Africa Expedition. The discovery of the Stairway of the Sun and the Progenitor virus. In 1966, the three founders led a massive expedition into the heart of the Endopaya Kingdom in Africa. They were searching for a legendary flower known as the Stairway of the Sun. This rare plant was said to grant superhuman traits to those who consumed it in tribal rituals. After months of searching the underground ruins, they finally discovered the ancient gardens. Inside the flowers, they found the Progenitor virus, a prehistoric retrovirus with the power to rewrite DNA. The discovery was the crowning achievement of their early careers. They finally held the clay of evolution in their hands. However, they quickly encountered a technical problem that threatened to end the project before it began. The Progenitor virus was incredibly unstable and highly lethal to most test subjects. It required a specific environment and a constant supply of fresh samples to remain viable. The virus could not be moved easily from the African ruins to their European laboratories. This physical problem forced the founders to build a massive corporate infrastructure to hide their activities. They needed a legitimate front to fund the expensive harvesting operations and the secret shipping lanes. They realized that a simple research group was not enough to manage a global biological asset. They had to create a pharmaceutical giant to mask their true intentions. This was the birth of the Umbrella Corporation as a public entity. The virus was the reason the company existed. The expedition transformed the group from a trio of scholars into a global power. They spent millions of dollars to secure the Endopaya ruins and build an underground research facility. This base was the source of every viral strain that would follow in the later years. The founders were now in a race to stabilize the Progenitor material before their rivals could find it. The company was the shield that protected their prehistoric secret from the prying eyes of the world. Brandon Bailey was the young protege of James Marcus and the fourth man present during the African discovery. He was a dedicated scientist who played a vital role in the initial isolation of the Progenitor virus. While the three founders returned to Europe to build the company, Bailey was left behind in the mud. He was assigned to manage the Endopaya research facility and oversee the constant flow of viral samples. He was the man who kept the heart of the company beating. Spencer effectively trapped Bailey in Africa for several decades. He realized that Bailey held the secret to the source of the organization's power. To maintain total control, Spencer restricted Bailey's movements and monitored his communications. The scientist became a ghost in the corporate records, living a life of isolation in the subterranean ruins. He was a prisoner of the very project he had helped to start. He was the forgotten founder of the viral empire. As the years passed, Bailey grew increasingly resentful of the leadership in Europe. He saw the company becoming a nest of vipers and betrayals. He realized that Spencer was systematically removing anyone who could challenge his authority. Despite his loyalty to Marcus, Bailey was powerless to stop the changes in the organization. He was a man who knew too much and had no way to share his secrets. He was a target waiting for a corporate bullet. Spencer eventually ordered the assassination of Brandon Bailey to ensure the African facility belonged only to himself. He wanted to erase any trace of the project's early history and the people who knew the truth. Bailey was murdered in the ruins he had called home for 30 years. His death was a clinical move to consolidate power within the Spencer family. The fourth man was erased from the official history, leaving only the 3 founders in the records. Established in 1968, Umbrella Pharmaceuticals quickly became a global leader in the healthcare industry. The company specialized in affordable aspirin and common household medicines that were sold in every nation. This legitimate front provided the organization with a clean image that was trusted by the public. People saw the red and white logo as a symbol of health and progress. It was the perfect mask for the dark research happening beneath the surface. The massive profits from the pharmaceutical sales funded 30 years of illegal biological research. Every bottle of medicine sold helped to build a new underground lab or hire a new virologist. The company used its legal status to bypass international regulations and transport dangerous materials. They moved viruses across borders under the guise of medical shipping and vaccine development. The public was unknowingly paying for the tools of its own destruction. This clean image allowed the organization to recruit the best scientific minds from the world's top universities. Young researchers believed they were working for a company dedicated to curing disease. In reality, they were often moved into classified programs to build the next generation of bioweapons. The layers of corporate bureaucracy ensured that the average employee never saw the true face of the company. It was a factory of secrets hidden in plain sight. The corporate front also provided Spencer with immense political influence. He used his wealth to fund the campaigns of mayors and the careers of police chiefs. This allowed the company to operate without the threat of government oversight or legal interference. They owned the towns where their labs were located, creating a private territory for their experiments. Umbrella was a state within a state, ruled by a man who saw himself as a god. The internal structure of the corporation was defined by the 3 competing visions of its founders. Oswell Spencer wanted more than just a successful business or a scientific breakthrough. He wanted to be a god who ruled over a new breed of immortal humans. His focus was on the long-term evolution of the species and the consolidation of his own power. He viewed the company as a tool for his own divine ascension. James Marcus possessed a different ambition. He was a scientist who wanted pure scientific perfection above all else. He was obsessed with the potential of the Progenitor virus and the creation of the ultimate biological weapon. He saw the company as a laboratory that provided the resources for his grotesque experiments. Marcus did not care about the politics or the godhood of the other founders. He only cared about the data and the lethal results. Edward Ashford represented the old world of aristocratic lineage and family prestige. He wanted to use the company to restore the Ashford name to its former glory. He saw the biological research as a way to prove the superiority of his bloodline to the world. Ashford was a man of tradition who felt out of place in the cold world of modern corporate warfare. He was the weakest of the 3 vipers, but he was also the most visible. This internal friction turned the organization into a nest of competing vipers. Scientists and executives were forced to choose sides, leading to a culture of active sabotage and betrayal. Rival labs would steal research and destroy samples to slow down the progress of their colleagues. The company was a house divided against itself from the very first day. The founders were always going to destroy each other in their quest for the ultimate prize. Edward Ashford died in 1968, shortly after the official founding of the corporation. The official report stated that his death was a tragic accident during a viral experiment. However, it was widely believed that Spencer had orchestrated the event to remove his primary rival. With Edward gone, the Ashford family was pushed into the background of the company history. Spencer was now the sole master of the organization's massive assets. The death of Edward was the first major betrayal in the history of the Secret Alliance. It set a precedent for the ruthless culture that would define the company for the next 30 years. Spencer proved that he was willing to kill his own partners to maintain his authority. He removed the only person who could challenge his financial and political leadership. The Ashford name became a relic of the past, kept around only for corporate appearances. By removing Edward, Spencer also removed the influence of the old world aristocracy. The company shifted away from the traditional values of the Ashford family and embraced the cold logic of the new era. Spencer wanted a corporation that was lean, secretive, and entirely under his command. He spent the next decade erasing Edward's contributions from the official records. He was rebuilding the company in his own image, one corpse at a time. The Ashford legacy was relegated to the isolated Antarctic facility and the training centers. Edward's son, Alexander, was left with the remnants of his father's work, but none of his power. This marginalization fueled a deep resentment within the family that would eventually lead to their own desperate projects. Spencer had won the first round of the corporate war. He was now the unchallenged architect of the global biological future. In the 1970 decade, James Marcus moved his research to the executive training school in the Arklay Mountains. He was focused on combining the Progenitor virus with leech DNA to create a more stable agent. This project eventually led to the birth of the T-virus, the most famous biological weapon in human history. Marcus discovered that the leech genes allowed the virus to replicate with an aggressive speed and a predictable result. Marcus used the training facility as his private laboratory for a decade of horrific experiments. He was not satisfied with animal testing. He needed human hosts to refine the viral strain. He began to run experiments on his own students, the young executives who were supposed to be the future of the company. He watched as they mutated into mindless monsters, recording their cellular breakdown with a clinical indifference. He was a man who had lost his soul. The T-virus was the first time the progenitor material had been turned into something truly deployable. It could be used to create zombies that functioned as a biological carpet bombing for any urban area. Marcus realized that the virus was a perfect tool for warfare and political destabilization. He spent years perfecting the infection rate and the survival time of the hosts. He was the master of the modern bioweapon industry. During this era, Marcus became increasingly paranoid and isolated. He realized that Spencer was watching his progress with a greedy eye. He kept his research notes in a series of encrypted files and hidden labs within the facility. He knew that the moment he succeeded, he would become a threat to the founder's authority. The training facility was a tomb where the teacher was building the weapons that would eventually kill him. On the orders of Oswell E. Spencer, the young and ambitious scientists Albert Wesker and William Birkin took action. In 1988, they cornered James Marcus in his private laboratory. Without a word, they gunned him down in the middle of his research notes. This was a tactical move to seize the results of the T-virus project. They were the executioners of a man who had taught them everything they knew. After the murder, they threw the body of the virologist into the sewers beneath the training facility. They believed that the water would wash away the evidence of their crime. Birkin immediately seized the research notes and the viral samples, taking the credit for the creation of the T-virus. He moved the project to the new underground lab in Raccoon City to begin a new era of development. Marcus was erased from the official company history. Spencer used this murder to consolidate the scientific power of the organization. He had replaced an uncooperative founder with two young loyalists who were eager for his approval. Wesker and Birkin were the next generation of vipers, ready to serve the founder's vision for a share of the glory. They did not care about the man they had killed. They only cared about the promotion and the resources that came with his death. The erasure of Marcus was nearly total. His name was removed from every patent and every report related to the T-virus. The training facility was closed and left to rot in the mountains. Spencer believed that the threat of the old virologist was gone forever. He did not realize that the sewers held a secret that would return to haunt him. The betrayal was successful, but it had left a lingering stain on the soul of the company. With James Marcus gone, William Birkin became the golden boy of the secret labs. He was a brilliant but unstable mind who was obsessed with surpassing the work of his predecessor. Birkin refined the T-virus into a weaponized form that could be sold to global militaries. He created a variety of BOW assets, including the early Hunter models and the first Tyrant prototypes. He was the man who turned a scientific discovery into a global business. Birkin's true obsession was the G-virus, a strain he discovered inside the body of a long-term test subject. He believed that the G-virus was superior to the T-virus because it allowed for spontaneous and infinite mutation. While the T-virus created stagnant zombies, the G-virus created a life form that was always evolving. Birkin saw himself as the father of a new species that would replace humanity. He was a man who had moved beyond the limits of corporate science. The research into the G-virus was done in absolute secrecy beneath the streets of Raccoon City. Birkin built a massive underground facility known as Nest to house his experiments. He used the local population as a live testing pool, monitoring the effects of the virus on the civilian hosts. He was protected by a network of bribed officials and corporate security teams. He was the king of his own subterranean kingdom, ruled by a viral god. His rise to power created a new era of growth for the organization. The company was now selling bioweapons to every major nation, fueling a global arms race. Birkin was the engine of this expansion, a man whose work was the most valuable asset in the pharmaceutical market. However, his ego was becoming a problem for Spencer. Birkin began to view the research as his personal property rather than a company asset. He was a viper ready to strike. The Ashford family struggled to maintain their former relevance after the death of Edward in 1968. Edward's son, Alexander Ashford, was a researcher who lacked the scientific genius of his father. He was marginalized by Spencer and relegated to the isolated Antarctic base. Alexander realized that the family name was fading from the corporate history. To regain his glory, he launched a secret program known as Project Code Veronica. Alexander used advanced genetic engineering to create a perfect set of twins who would inherit the Ashford genius. He harvested the DNA of his father and combined it with the genetic material of an ancient ancestor. In 1971, Alfred and Alexia were born in the secret lab. They were designed to be the next generation of leaders who would reclaim the company from Spencer. They were the biological hope of a dying lineage. Alfred Ashford grew into a man of unstable mind and violent tendencies. He was obsessed with the family history and the preservation of their Antarctic base. He lacked the scientific intellect of his sister, but he possessed a fanatical loyalty to the Ashford name. Alfred saw himself as the protector of the family legacy, even as he descended into a world of total madness and isolation. He was a man trapped in the shadow of a father he never knew. Alexia Ashford was the true success of the project. At a young age, she showed an intellectual capacity that surpassed any researcher in the company. She was a prodigy who viewed humans as insects to be studied. Alexia moved the family research in a new and dangerous direction, focusing on the integration of viral material with the human host. She was the one who would finally challenge Spencer's authority. She was the queen of the ice. At the age of 12, Alexia Ashford created the T-Veronica virus in the Antarctic labs. She achieved this by mixing the Progenitor virus with the DNA of a queen ant. She believed that the collective intelligence of the insect would provide the stability needed for a successful integration. Alexia was not interested in building weapons. She was interested in building a throne. She saw herself as the first queen of a new biological world. To stabilize the virus, Alexia realized that the host required a long period of cryogenic sleep. She needed her body to adapt to the viral load at a molecular level over many years. In 1983, the teenager injected herself with the untested strain and entered a 15-year coma. She left her brother Alfred in charge of the base, trusting him to protect her until her awakening. It was a cold and calculated gamble for immortality. During her long sleep, the Ashford family fell into total irrelevance. Alfred's madness grew as he tried to maintain the illusion of family power. He built a private training facility on Rockfort Island and obsessed over his sister's eventual return. The company viewed the Antarctic base as a failed experiment and a secondary asset. Spencer had successfully pushed the Ashfords to the edge of the world. He believed the family was no longer a threat. In the awakening of Alexia in 1998 would prove to be a catastrophic event. She emerged from her coma with superhuman powers and the ability to control the viral fire. She was no longer human. She was a biological queen who viewed the entire planet as her hive. Her return was the final act of the Ashford tragedy. She was the fire that would burn the family name out of the history books. She was the daughter of the first betrayal. Umbrella's ultimate goal was the creation of the Tyrant, a controllable human superweapon. The organization wanted a biological asset that possessed massive physical power and a tactical intelligence. They needed a soldier that could follow complex orders and operate in any environment. However, the early stages of the project were a cycle of failure and cellular breakdown. Most human hosts simply mutated into mindless zombies when exposed to the viral load. The researchers discovered a massive genetic barrier to the creation of a successful tyrant. They estimated that only 1 in 10 million humans possessed the rare genetic markers required to survive the transformation. This scarcity made it impossible to mass produce the superweapon through standard military recruitment. The company had to find a way to bypass the natural limits of the human genome. They needed a perfect host who could be cloned for industrial production. The project moved through several stages of development in the Arklay and European labs. The early T001 model was a grotesque failure with an exposed heart and limited intelligence. The subsequent T002 model, seen in the 1998 Mansion incident, was a massive improvement, but still suffered from stability issues. The researchers were obsessed with finding the tyrant gene that would allow for a stable and predictable mutation. The breakthrough occurred when the company began to experiment with cloning and genetic editing. They realized that if they could find a single compatible host, they could build an entire army of super soldiers. This led to a global search for the rare individuals who carried the divine DNA. The Tyrant Project was the peak of the company's military ambition. It was the attempt to turn the human body into a refined machine of war. Sergey Vladimir was a former Soviet colonel who possessed the rare tyrant gene that the company had been hunting for years. He was a man of immense physical stature and absolute loyalty to the organization. Spencer realized that Sergey was the key to the industrial production of the superweapon. In exchange for high-level executive power, Sergey provided the company with 10 clones of himself to jumpstart the Tyrant program. The cloning of Sergey Vladimir produced the T-103 models, the most successful and mass-produced tyrants in history. These assets were stable, controllable, and capable of operating behind enemy lines in tactical uniforms. They were the biological hammers of the corporate interest. Sergey's contribution advanced the research by several decades, each giving Spencer the army he had always envisioned. The colonel became the enforcer of the founder's will. In return for his genetic material, Sergey was granted a position on the executive board. He was tasked with managing the organization's most sensitive military assets and its global security forces. He oversaw the development of the UMF-013 supercomputer and the secret labs in Russia. Sergey was a man who believed in the restoration of the motherland through the power of biological weapons. He was the loyal shield of the Umbrella Throne. The relationship between Sergey and Spencer was built on mutual respect and total ruthlessness. Sergey did not care about the eugenics dream. He cared about the results and the power. He was willing to sacrifice his own clones to test the effectiveness of the bioweapons. He was the man who turned the Tyrant Project into a global industry. He was the soldier who gave his body to the corporation and his soul to the architect. Lisa Trevor was a young girl who became the most tragic test subject in the company history. She was the daughter of the architect who built the Arklay mansion, abducted by Spencer in the 1960 decade. For 30 years, her body was subjected to every viral strain the company produced. She survived the Progenitor virus, the T virus, and countless other pathogens. Her body absorbed everything they threw at her, mutating her into a grotesque and immortal horror. Lisa became a living laboratory for the researchers in the mansion. Her system developed a unique ability to adapt to any biological threat at a molecular level. It was inside her mutated system that William Birkin first discovered the G virus sleeping in her cells. The G virus was an accidental result of the decades of constant viral interaction. It was a pathogen that Birkin had never planned, but one that he immediately recognized as the ultimate prize. The discovery of the G virus in 1988 changed the direction of the organization's research. It moved the focus away from the stagnant T virus and toward the infinite mutation of the G strain. Lisa Trevor was the source of this new era of horror, a human being who had been ground up to produce a god. She remained a prisoner of the Mansion Labs, a mindless monster that was still searching for the mother she had lost decades before. Lisa's survival was a miracle of biological resilience that the scientists could not fully explain. She was proof that the human body could endure the prehistoric fire if it was pushed to the absolute limit. However, she was also a warning of the instability of the research. The G virus was a spontaneous accident that threatened to consume its creator. Lisa Trevor was the ghost of the Arklay mansion, a reminder of the price that Spencer was willing to pay. The researchers eventually attempted to dispose of Lisa once they had extracted the necessary data for the G project. However, her regenerative abilities made her nearly impossible to kill with conventional weapons. She continued to wander the subterranean levels of the mansion, a hidden variable in the corporate spreadsheet. She was the ultimate victim of the Spencer vision, a girl whose life was stolen to fuel the dreams of a madman. Spencer was running behind Umbrella's back. While the official laboratories of the organization focused on the industrial production of monsters and bioweapons, Oswell E. Spencer was operating an even deeper program in the cold shadows. This was Project W, also known as the Wesker Children Project. Spencer gathered hundreds of children from around the world, selected for their high intelligence and superior genetic markers. He renamed every child Wesker and placed them in elite schools and universities. His goal was to raise a generation of superior humans who would one day lead his new world order. He wanted to build a family of gods who were loyal only to himself. This program was a total secret, even from the high-level executives and the founding partners of the company. Spencer viewed Project W as his true legacy, a project that fulfilled the original eugenics dream of the 1960 decade. He provided the children with the finest education and medical care, all funded by the corporate profits. They were monitored by undercover observers their entire lives, unaware that they were part of a massive biological experiment. Spencer was their silent father and their ultimate judge. He watched their development through a series of clinical reports and encrypted files, waiting for the right moment to trigger the harvest. The indoctrination of the Wesker children was a subtle and long-term process. They were taught to value logic, strength, and ambition above all other human traits. Spencer wanted them to see the rest of the stagnant population as an inferior resource. He built a mental framework of superiority that matched his own social Darwinist views. The children grew into adulthood as the most capable individuals in their respective fields, possessing a drive that was manufactured by their corporate upbringing. They were the refined clay that Spencer intended to carve into his new ruling class. In 1998, Spencer triggered the final stage of the project by injecting the 13 remaining candidates with a prototype virus. This was a lethal filter designed to select the ones who could achieve godhood. Most of the children suffered an immediate cellular breakdown and died in agony as their bodies rejected the viral material. Only 2 survived the transition, Albert Wesker and the brilliant researcher Alex Wesker. They gained superhuman strength, speed, and intelligence. becoming the living proof of the founder's theory. Spencer had finally manufactured his own gods through a massacre of his own children. The success of Project W gave Spencer a private army of superior individuals who could operate within the company. He used them to monitor the other scientists and to carry out his most sensitive assassinations. Albert Wesker was placed in the STARS unit to serve as a tactical mole, while Alex Wesker was given the task of researching biological immortality. Spencer believed he had built a family of loyal servants who would carry his vision into the next century. He did not realize that by raising gods, and he was raising the very beings who would eventually destroy his empire. The legacy of the Wesker children is a story of total betrayal and biological arrogance. Spencer thought he could control the prehistoric fire by putting it into the hands of his chosen sons and daughters. However, Albert and Alex were too intelligent to remain slaves to a dying man. They recognized that their power made them the true masters of the world. Project W produced the most dangerous individuals in the history of the franchise, men and women who had moved beyond the need for a human heart. It was the ultimate crime of a man who wanted to play God with the future of the species. The global expansion of the corporation led to a Cold War between the American and European branches. The umbrella, USA, was the primary center for the production of raw power and massive biological assets. They were responsible for the development of the Tyrant project and the G-virus research in Raccoon City. Their focus was on building the perfect soldier that could dominate a conventional battlefield through brute force. They were the muscle of the organization, led by the ambitious and unstable William Birkin. They prioritized the industrial scale of their operations. Umbrella Europe operated with a more refined and clinical philosophy. They focused on the intelligence and the total control of their biological weapons. The European researchers believed that a monster was useless if it could not follow complex tactical orders. They spent their resources on parasite research and psychological manipulation of the host. Their headquarters in France and the labs in the Antarctic were dedicated to a more sophisticated form of biological warfare. They were the brain of the company, often looking down on their American colleagues as clumsy and inefficient. This rivalry turned the organization into a fragmented house of competing interests. The two branches would often refuse to share data or resources, leading to a slow duplication of efforts and an increase in corporate friction. Spencer encouraged this tension, believing that the competition would drive the scientists to greater breakthroughs. He watched from his estate as the two divisions fought for his personal favor and his financial support. It was a tactical game that kept any single branch from becoming too powerful to control. The company was a unified front to the public, but a war zone on the inside. The American branch focused on the T-103 Tyrant series and the infinite mutation of the G-virus. They wanted a weapon that was inescapable and terrifying to the civilian population. Meanwhile, the European branch was developing the Nemesis project, a parasite designed to fix the intelligence flaws of the earlier models. These two paths represented the divergent goals of the corporate elite. One wanted a massive hammer to crush the enemy, and the other wanted a surgical scalpel to cut them out. They were both building the end of the world on different continents. The conflict between the branches reached a peak during the final years of the 1990 decade. Umbrella Europe began to export their parasite technology to the American labs to test its effectiveness against the STARS members. This was not an act of cooperation, but a way to gather data on their rivals' territory. The European directors wanted to prove that their intelligence-based approach was superior to the raw power of the G virus. This internal struggle for dominance slowed the organization's response to the growing legal and physical threats. The Vipers were too busy biting each other to see the fire coming. The rivalry between Europe and the USA eventually contributed to the total collapse of the organization. Because the branches operated as independent entities, they could not present a unified defense during the Raccoon trials. The legal investigators were able to play the different divisions against each other, which is exposing the systemic corruption of the entire company. The Cold War within the corporation proved that the eugenics dream was a hollow foundation. Spencer had built an empire of competition that was destined to fail the moment it was challenged by the truth. The two branches were the twin pillars of a temple that was about to fall. Part 18, The Nemesis Project. How Umbrella Europe designed a parasite. The European division realized that the standard T-virus tyrants lack the cognitive ability to perform complex tactical missions. To fix this fundamental flaw, they created the NE-alpha parasite, a biological organism designed to be implanted in a host brain. This parasite took over the entire nervous system of the tyrant, acting as a secondary intelligence that bypassed the damage caused by the virus. It allowed the monster to follow specific orders, recognize targets, and even use high-level weaponry. This was the birth of the Nemesis Project, the most ambitious program in the history of the branch. The first successful deployment of this technology was the Nemesis T-type, a massive super soldier sent into Raccoon City in 1998. The parasite allowed the creature to focus on a single objective, the total elimination of the STARS members who had survived the mansion incident. Nemesis showed a level of persistence and tactical awareness that no previous bioweapon had achieved. It could navigate the urban ruins, use a rocket launcher with precision, and adapt its strategy based on the movements of its prey. It was the peak of European biological engineering and a nightmare for the survivors. The Nemesis was more than just a monster. It was a physical proof of the company's ability to control the biological fire. The parasite acted as a sentient leash on the viral mutation, preventing the cellular breakdown that often ruined other assets. This success gave the European branch a massive advantage in the internal corporate war for funding. They had built a weapon that could be sold as a precision tool for government assassinations and clandestine operations. The project showed that the future of bioweapons was in the integration of different organisms to create a unified machine of war. The parasite also possessed a unique ability to mutate the host further when the physical body was damaged. This led to the multiple stages of the Nemesis transformation, each more lethal and grotesque than the last. The European scientists watched the combat data from Raccoon City with a clinical excitement, recording how the parasite reacted to the stress of the engagement. They did not see the destruction of a city. They saw the successful testing of a product. The Nemesis was the realization of the Marcus dream, refined by the cold intellect of the European elite. Eventually, the Nemesis project evolved into the search for the perfect hybrid host. The researchers wanted to find a way to merge the parasite and the virus without the need for a massive tyrant body. They envisioned a parasite that could turn a standard soldier into a superhuman operative with total loyalty and a photographic memory. This line of research would later influence the development of the Las Plagas and the C virus. And Nemesis was the first step toward a world where biology was a programmable machine. It was the attempt to put a soul into a weapon. The legacy of the project is a world where the monsters are now intelligent enough to hunt the heroes. The European branch proved that the virus was just the engine, but the parasite was the driver. This discovery made the global bioterrorism market much more dangerous and unpredictable. The Nemesis was a ghost that haunted the streets of the Midwest, but its data haunted the laboratories of the world for decades. It was the ultimate product of the corporate vision, a being that had moved beyond the need for a human mind. It was the king of the BOW era. The Paraguay's Line Company was a front for a luxury cruise line that served as a floating laboratory system for the organization. These massive ships allowed the company to conduct their most dangerous research in international waters. Away from any government jurisdiction or military oversight, the scientists could experiment with viral strains that were too lethal for land-based labs. The ships were equipped with high-tech containment units and surgical suites hidden beneath the passenger decks. It was a world of luxury built on top of a world of industrial horror. The ocean was their primary shield against the law. These cruise ships, such as the Spencer Rain and the Queen Zenobia, were essential for the global movement of biological materials. They could carry thousands of viral samples and BOW assets between the regional branches without triggering a customs inspection or a diplomatic incident. The company used the ships to test the effectiveness of their weapons in a closed and controlled environment. If a containment breach occurred at sea, the ship could simply be scuttled to hide the evidence and the bodies. It was a cold and efficient solution to the problem of international maritime law. The floating laboratories were also used to host secret auctions for the world's most dangerous dictators and terrorist groups. High-level executives would invite potential buyers onto the ships, showing off the latest bioweapons in live demonstrations in the hold. The Paraguay's line provided a neutral ground where the illegal trade could happen in absolute comfort and secrecy. The organization was no longer just a pharmaceutical company. It was a global arms dealer operating in the blue shadows of the deep ocean. They were the masters of a mobile empire that had no physical borders. The use of the ships proved that the company was a truly global entity with no loyalty to any specific nation. They viewed the world's oceans as their private highway for the transport of the prehistoric fire. The Paraguay's line was the logistical backbone of the viral expansion, ensuring that no country was safe from the reach of the founder. Every major port was a potential target for a secret delivery of the T-virus. The company had turned the leisure industry into a vehicle for the apocalypse. It was a clinical exploitation of the global shipping lanes. The researchers on the ships were often the most isolated and unstable members of the organization. Living for months at sea in a world of viruses and monsters took a heavy psychological toll on the staff. This led to several undocumented outbreaks and accidents that were buried beneath the waves. The Paraguay's line was a graveyard for the corporate soul, a place where the rules of humanity were completely ignored. The ships were ghosts that moved through the mist, carrying the seeds of the next global disaster. They were the floating cathedrals of the Spencer religion. Even after the fall of the organization in 2003, the legacy of these ghost ships would continue to haunt the shores of the world. Several vessels remained at sea, their crews infected and their cargo still active. These floating ruins became a source of viral samples for the new generation of bioterrorists. The Paraguay's line was the final proof that the organization had planned for a world that was permanently infected. They had built a network that was too vast and too hidden to be fully dismantled. The ocean still holds the secrets of the red and white logo. Raccoon City was the ultimate realization of the organization's corporate dominance over a civilian population. The company effectively owned the town, providing the primary source of employment and economic growth for the Midwest region. They funded the campaign of Mayor Warren, ensuring that the local government followed the corporate agenda in every city council meeting. They also bribed Chief Brian Irons of the police department to suppress any investigation into the company's secret activities in the mountains. Raccoon City was a company town, where the logo was seen on every street corner. This total control allowed the organization to build a massive underground laboratory known as Nest beneath the city streets. The facility was connected to the urban infrastructure, allowing the company to dump biological waste into the sewers and tap into the local power grid without any oversight. They treated the entire population of 100,000 people as a live testing pool for their viral agents. Every clinic and every hospital in the city was a monitoring station for the corporate scientists to track the spread of common diseases. The people were the subjects of an experiment they did not know existed. The organization created a private security force and a special tactics unit to manage any internal threats to their territory. They used their massive influence to place Albert Wesker in the STARS department, giving them a direct line into the police operations and the evidence lockers. The company could erase evidence, silence witnesses, and control the flow of local information with a single phone call to the station. Raccoon City was a closed system where the rules of the United States did not apply to the executive board. It was a laboratory for the social and biological engineering of the future. The transformation of the city was a slow and deliberate process of corporate colonization over 30 years. By the time the 1998 outbreak occurred, the people had no way to escape the trap that had been built around them. The company had turned a peaceful community into a biological war zone to test the effectiveness of their super soldiers and viral strains. Raccoon City was the proof that the organization viewed humanity as a disposable and renewable resource. It was the first city to be consumed by the fire, but the founder intended for it to be the template for the globe. The city also served as the primary transport hub for the organization's American operations. The local railway and the airport were used to move biological materials to the regional branches and the maritime facilities. This logistical integration made the city essential to the global network. When the outbreak began, the very infrastructure that supported the town became the vector for the infection. The sewers, the trains, and the water supply moved the virus to every neighborhood in a matter of hours. The company had built a perfect machine of destruction and called it home. The fallout of the Raccoon City incident was the primary cause of the organization's eventual collapse. The scale of the horror was too large for a total cover-up, leading to the global scandal that exposed the red and white logo. The city was a sacrifice made by Spencer to gather a final set of combat data. He watched from his estate as the town he had built was erased by a nuclear strike. Raccoon City was the peak of the corporate ambition and the start of the final judgment. It remains the most famous graveyard in the history of the pharmaceutical industry. The collapse of the secret empire began in the Arklay Mountains in May of 1998. The Queen Leech, a biological entity born from the mutated cells of the murdered James Marcus, returned to seek a personal revenge. It possessed the collective memories and the sharp hatred of the former founder, using its control over the viral leeches to sabotage the organization's most sensitive facilities. The Queen Leech leaked the T virus into the Arklay Mansion labs and the nearby executive training school. This was the first uncontrolled disaster in the history of the company, and it targeted the very people who had betrayed Marcus 10 years prior. The outbreak turned the researchers and the security staff into mindless zombies within a matter of hours. The containment protocols failed as the virus moved through the ventilation systems and the narrow underground tunnels. The nearby forest was infected by escaping BOW assets, leading to reports of cannibalistic murders in the Raccoon City outskirts. The organization tried to suppress the incident with their usual efficiency, but the scale of the infection was too large to bury. The cracks in the corporate shield were finally starting to show to the local authorities and the public. James Marcus, reborn through the viral fire, wanted to destroy the company that had stolen his life and his research. He viewed the outbreak as a divine judgment on Spencer and the young scientists who had carried out the assassination. He monitored the chaos from the ruins of the training school, waiting for the perfect moment to strike at the heart of the regional operations. The Queen Leech was a ghost that had come back to burn the laboratory down. It was a biological retribution for 20 years of corporate sins and industrial betrayal. The Arklay incident proved that the organization could no longer control the prehistoric fire it had cultivated. Their bioweapons were now loose in the woods, and their secrets were being exposed by the local police investigations. Spencer was forced to take drastic measures to contain the legal and physical fallout. He sent the STARS unit into the mountains to gather combat data, using the disaster as a final experiment for his super soldiers. The mansion was the graveyard of the company's secrecy, marking the official end of their era of total invisibility. This incident also highlighted the internal instability of the corporate hierarchy. The fact that a dead founder could return to sabotage the labs showed that the company was vulnerable to its own history. The board of directors began to question the security of their biological assets. Spencer realized that he was no longer the only master of the Progenitor virus legacy. The Queen Leech was a warning that the past would never stay buried in the sewers. It was the first domino to fall in a sequence of events that would eventually erase the red and white logo. Albert Wesker, acting as the captain of the STARS unit, was the organization's most trusted mole in the local police department. However, by 1998, he had realized that the company was a sinking ship destined for a legal collapse. Wesker decided to use the Arklay outbreak to facilitate his own private exit strategy. He lured his team into the mansion to collect combat data on the biological weapons, intending to sell this information to a rival syndicate. He was no longer a loyal servant. He was a traitor looking for a much better deal on the black market. Wesker operated with a cold and clinical precision throughout the entire mansion incident. He manipulated both the company and his own team to ensure that the tactical data was secured. He did not care about the lives of his fellow officers or the researchers who died in the lab. To Wesker, the disaster was a perfect opportunity to prove his own superiority and his value to the global competitors. He was a man who had outgrown the shadow of Oswell Spencer. He was ready to become his own master in a world of viral chaos. His betrayal included the faked death of his own human form in the Arklay Lab. After being impaled by a tyrant, Wesker allowed the prototype virus in his system to reanimate his body. He rose from the dead with superhuman abilities, shedding his loyalty to the organization along with his own humanity. He vanished into the shadows with the research data, leaving the company to face the legal and physical fallout of the disaster. He was the viper that had finally bitten the hand that fed it for 30 years. The betrayal of Wesker was a catastrophic blow to the organization's security protocols. He knew every secret, every lab location, and every political connection the company possessed. By defecting to a rival company, he turned the organization's best weapon against its own interests. Spencer had spent decades molding Wesker into the perfect soldier, only to have that soldier become his greatest enemy. The mansion incident was a success for the mole, but it was the beginning of the corporate end for the founders. Wesker's escape provided the rival company with the blueprints for the T-virus and the Tyrant project. This ended the organization's monopoly on biological warfare and started a global arms race. The former captain became a ghost that haunted the corporate operations, always one step ahead of the USS cleanup teams. He was the first of the Wesker children to realize the truth of his origins. His betrayal was the primary reason the company could no longer maintain its secret empire. He had stolen the keys to the kingdom and opened the gates for the competition. After faking his death, Wesker joined an unnamed rival company that was dedicated to breaking the organization's biological monopoly. This group operated through a specialized paramilitary unit known as the HCF, or Hostile Capture Force. Their goal was to steal the viral strains and the research data that the organization had spent 30 years building in secret. The rival company wanted to become the new giant of the bioweapon market, using Wesker's insider knowledge to dismantle their competition from the inside out. The HCF was a surgical strike force equipped with the latest tactical gear and anti-bow weaponry. They were designed to infiltrate secure facilities and secure high-value assets with absolute efficiency. Wesker led several of these operations in the years following the Raccoon City disaster. The rival company was not interested in eugenics or godhood. They were interested in the raw power and the profit of the viral trade. They were the corporate jackals feeding on the dying remains of the Spencer Empire. The most significant theft occurred during the attack on Rockfort Island, where the HCF seized the T Veronica virus. This was a direct strike at the heart of the Ashford family legacy. The rival company also recovered samples of the T virus and the G virus from the ruins of Raccoon City and the African facility. By 1999, they possessed a catalogue of biological weapons that rivaled the organization's own archives. Wesker had provided them with the maps to the most sensitive laboratories on the planet. The existence of the rival company proved that the organization was no longer the only player in the global game. The prehistoric fire had spread to other hands, and the global arms race was entering a new and dangerous phase. Spencer found himself fighting a war on two fronts, one against the law and one against a shadow competitor. The HCF was the physical proof that the company was losing its grip on the biological future. The monopoly was over, and the market was now open to the highest bidder. This transition from a single giant to a decentralized market made the world much more dangerous. The rival company was less concerned with containment and more concerned with the mass production of weapons. They used Wesker's data to refine their own assets, creating a new generation of monsters that were sold to terrorist groups and rogue nations. The organization had accidentally created its own destruction by raising a man who could see the value in a different master. The HCF was the sword that cut the umbrella in half. The destruction of the Arklay Laboratory by Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield was a turning point for the organization's secrecy. For the first time, a group of trained professionals had survived a biological disaster and brought back physical evidence of the company's crimes. The STARS members found the private diaries of the researchers, the maps of the labs, and the bodies of the mutated monsters. They had seen the true face of the organization, and they were determined to expose it to the international community. The incident forced the company to use its massive legal resources to bury the truth before it reached the media. They used their influence in the Raccoon City government to discredit the survivors and label them as unstable officers. The official police report was heavily redacted, and the mansion was burned to the ground to remove any lingering biological evidence. However, the secret was already out. The public began to hear rumors of man-eating monsters and corporate labs in the mountains. The mask of health and progress was beginning to slip. What the STARS found was more than just a single lab. They found a template for a global horror. They realized that the mansion was just one node in a massive network of industrial death. This realization led to the formation of a resistance movement among the survivors of the pharmaceutical era. Chris and Jill became the primary enemies of the organization, dedicated to hunting down every hidden facility across the globe. The mansion incident was the spark that lit the fuse of the global counter-bioterrorism effort. For the organization, the incident meant that they had to move their research even further into the shadows. They began to dismantle their surface-level operations and focus on their underground and maritime labs. Spencer realized that the era of open dominance was coming to a definitive end. He had to become a ghost to survive the coming storm of legal trials and military raids. The mansion was the first domino to fall in a sequence that would lead to the 2003 bankruptcy. The data gathered by the STARS also alerted the United States government to the danger of the viral research. While the company tried to bribe their way out of the situation, certain federal agencies began to watch the organization with suspicion. The mansion incident proved that the company was a threat to national security. The era of unchecked corporate power was ending. The survivors had provided the world with the first chapter of the organization's long and bloody history. In September of 1998, William Birkin reached a final breaking point with the corporate leadership. He realized that Spencer was planning to steal his G-virus research and remove him from the organization for good. Birkin decided to defect to the United States military, she offering them the virus in exchange for total protection and a new laboratory. This was the ultimate betrayal of the scientific golden boy. Birkin was willing to hand over the company's most valuable asset to their greatest political rival. The organization responded by sending Hunk's Alpha Team, an elite USS unit, to seize the virus by force. They cornered Birkin in his underground laboratory and opened fire, riddling the scientist with bullets in a moment of panic. In the struggle, several vials of the T-virus were shattered on the floor, leaking into the sewer system. This was the catastrophic mistake that triggered the Raccoon City outbreak. A single tactical engagement had released the plague into the water supply of a major urban center. Birkin, dying on the floor, Chiu injected himself with the final sample of the G-virus as an act of raw desperation. He mutated into a massive and unstoppable monster, slaughtering the USS team in the dark tunnels. Only Hunk survived the encounter, escaping with a single vial of the merchandise. Meanwhile, the T-virus moved through the city's infrastructure, turning the population into a wave of mindless zombies. The scientist's decision to defect had accidentally signed the death warrant for 100,000 people. The USS attack was a clinical mission that resulted in a total disaster for the company's image. The organization had tried to preserve its monopoly, but had ended up destroying its own territory. Raccoon City was now a biological war zone, and the secret research was out in the open for the entire world to see. Birkin's defection was the final crack that caused the dam to burst. The company was no longer just a shadow. It was the cause of a global tragedy that could not be ignored. The fallout of this event was the primary driver of the organization's bankruptcy. The leak in the sewers proved that the company's security protocols were fundamentally flawed. They had failed to contain their own creations, leading to the destruction of a significant American city. The incident in the lab was the moment the organization lost control of the narrative. No amount of legal bribery could erase the fact that the company had poisoned 100,000 people. The fire was out of the bottle, and the lab was gone. The outbreak that made Umbrella's crimes impossible to hide. Within days of the initial leak, the Raccoon City infection spread to every residential district in the town. The local police and the medical staff were overwhelmed by the sudden wave of cannibalistic violence. 100,000 people were transformed into the walking dead, wandering the streets in a mindless hunger. The organization used the chaos as a final opportunity to test their bioweapons in a real-world environment. They dropped the Nemesis and several T-103 tyrants into the city to gather data. The outbreak made the company's crimes impossible to hide from the international community. News crews and survivors managed to leak images of the monsters and the corporate security teams to the public. The United States government was forced to acknowledge the disaster, eventually ordering the nuclear sterilization of the city to contain the virus. Raccoon City was erased from the map in a single flash of fire, but the legacy of the infection remained. The world had seen the true face of the pharmaceutical giant, and it was a face of death. The organization tried to blame the disaster on a rogue William Birkin, claiming that the company was a victim of a single mad scientist. They used their massive wealth to bribe witnesses and buy the silence of the media. However, the evidence was too overwhelming for a total cover-up. Raccoon City became a symbol of corporate greed and biological irresponsibility. It was the moment the public stopped trusting the red and white logo. The era of the clean image was officially over for the board of directors. The disaster also led to the formation of the global counter-bioterrorism movement. Survivors of the city joined forces with international agencies to hunt down the remaining labs and executives. The organization found itself under siege from every side, fighting a legal and physical war for its own survival. Spencer's godhood was being challenged by the very humanity he had tried to evolve. Raccoon City was the graveyard of the company's ambition and the site of its greatest moral failure. The city served as a massive field test for the Nemesis project and the mass production of tyrants. The company valued the combat data more than the lives of the citizens. This clinical indifference was the ultimate proof of the company's corruption. They had turned an American city into a disposal site for their industrial errors. The memory of Raccoon City would become the driving force behind the global effort to dismantle the organization. It was the day the world realized that the umbrella did not protect anyone from the rain. The Tyrant Factory, Vincent Goldman's paranoia, and the Second City umbrella destroyed. Shortly after the Raccoon City disaster, the organization suffered another catastrophic loss on Sheena Island. This private territory was the site of a massive tyrant factory. dedicated to the industrial production of the superweapon. The facility was managed by Vincent Goldman, a high-level executive whose paranoia and cruelty led to a total breakdown of the local order. Goldman began to murder his own staff and the local residents to hide his illegal activities from the corporate auditors. He was a man consumed by the same cold logic as Spencer. The island was destroyed when Goldman triggered a self-destruct sequence during a viral outbreak. He wanted to erase the evidence of his failures and his private crimes, regardless of the human cost to the employees. This was the second city that the organization had destroyed in a matter of months. The loss of the Tyrant factory was a massive financial blow that further bankrupted the company. They had lost their primary source of military assets and their most advanced production line. The giant was starting to bleed from its own limbs. The Sheena Island incident proved that the organization's management was in a state of total collapse. Regional directors were operating as independent warlords, prioritizing their own survival over the interests of the board. The company was losing control of its researchers and its security teams across the globe. Spencer was forced to watch as his empire was dismantled by the incompetence and the madness of his own employees. The House of Vipers was finally eating itself from the inside out. The destruction of the factory also meant that the company could no longer fulfill its contracts with the global black market. Rival syndicates began to move into the territory, taking over the accounts and the customers that the organization had once dominated. The monopoly on biological weapons was being erased by a sequence of industrial disasters. Sheena Island was a tomb for the corporate ambition. It was the proof that the organization was no longer capable of maintaining its own secrets in a world of digital leaks. Goldman's madness was a reflection of the toxic culture that Spencer had created. By encouraging competition and ruthlessness, the founder had built an organization that lacked any central loyalty. When the pressure of the Raccoon City trials began to mount, the regional managers chose to destroy their own assets rather than face justice. This systemic failure was the final sign that the company was doomed. The organization was a monster that was consuming its own body to stay alive. Sheena Island was the second major wound in the corporate hide. In December of 1998, Albert Wesker led a massive HCF attack on Rockfort Island. The goal was to seize the T. Veronica virus from the Ashford family and finish the destruction of the organization's training facilities. The attack was a surgical strike that overwhelmed the island's security forces in a matter of hours. During the chaos, a T-virus leak occurred, turning the elite training school into a biological graveyard. The Reaper had returned to burn the place where he was once trained by the corporation. The resulting outbreak destroyed the most secure training facility in the company portfolio. The Ashford family, already on the edge of madness, was finally erased from the corporate history. Alfred was killed, and Alexia was defeated after her long hibernation. The death of the Ashford twins marked the end of the original founding lineage. Spencer was now the only one left, standing alone in a house of ruins. The rival company had successfully dismantled the last of the organization's high-level military and training assets. The Rockfort Island incident was the final blow to the organization's public reputation. Images of the burning island and the mutated Ashford twins were leaked to the international media, proving that the company was still conducting illegal research after the Raccoon City disaster. The United States government and the UN could no longer ignore the danger posed by the remaining labs. The organization found itself under a global freeze of its assets and its shipping lanes. They were a company without a country and without a future. Wesker's involvement was the ultimate irony for the founder. The man he had raised to be his son was the one who delivered the killing blow to the family history. The HCF attack proved that the rival company was now the dominant force in the bioweapon market. They had the samples, the data, and the best operative in the world. The organization was a dying giant, waiting for the final legal judgment to fall. Rockfort Island was the definitive end of the research era. The destruction of the island also meant that the company lost its primary source of elite security personnel. The training center had produced the USS and UBCS operatives who maintained the corporate order. Without a constant supply of new recruits, the company's paramilitary power began to fade. They were left with a fragmented force of mercenaries who had no loyalty to the red and white logo. The infrastructure of the secret alliance was falling apart block by block. Rockfort was the graveyard of the Ashford dream. G-Part 29, the Africa shutdown. Panicking, as the international pressure mounted, Spencer ordered the total shutdown of the original Progenitor facility in Africa. He realized that the ruins of the Indepire Kingdom were the most damning evidence of his 30-year conspiracy. To hide the source of his power from the FBI and the UN, he ordered the execution of the entire staff at the site. This was a clinical mass murder designed to erase the very beginning of the company. Spencer was a man who was willing to burn his own origins to survive the legal day. The founder was terrified of what the Progenitor virus truly contained. He had spent decades trying to tame the prehistoric fire, but he realized that the ancient organism was too volatile for any human control. He saw the G virus and the T Veronica mutations as a warning of what happens when the virus is unleashed. Spencer believed that if the international community found the Africa site, they would discover the true scale of his madness. He wanted to bury the well forever, even if it meant destroying his life's work. The shutdown was carried out by the organization's most loyal security units. They moved through the subterranean labs, killing every researcher and destroying every file. The ruins were sealed with heavy steel doors and buried under tons of rock. Spencer believed that by closing the Africa site, he had secured his own safety. He did not realize that the data had already been copied by Brandon Bailey and Albert Wesker. The ghost of the discovery would continue to haunt him for the rest of his long life. The Africa shutdown marked the final transition of the organization from a business to a fugitive syndicate. They no longer had a source of fresh Progenitor material, forcing them to rely on their existing samples and their synthetic derivatives. The company was a hollow shell, living off the research of the past while the future was being seized by their rivals. Spencer was a king without a kingdom, hiding in his estate and waiting for the end. He had closed the door on the godhood he had always craved for himself. The massacre at the facility was the final proof of Spencer's total disregard for human life. He had killed the people who had served him for 30 years to protect his own reputation. This act of cruelty left the remaining employees in a state of terror. They realized that their employer was a monster who would destroy them the moment they became a liability. The internal loyalty of the organization was completely broken. Spencer was alone in his shadow, surrounded by the ghosts of the people he had murdered. Part 30. The Raccoon Trials. How Umbrella spent years using lawyers, bribery, and false witnesses to delay justice. The organization managed to survive for 5 more years through a sequence of intense legal battles known as the Raccoon Trials. They used their massive wealth to hire the best lawyers and to bribe the judges and the politicians involved in the case. The company blamed the Raccoon City disaster on the rogue scientist William Birkin, claiming that they had no knowledge of his illegal activities. They produced false witnesses and forged documents to prove their own innocence. They were the masters of the global legal deadlock. These trials kept the United States government in a state of paralysis, preventing any direct action against the company's regional headquarters. The organization used this time to dismantle their remaining labs and hide their assets on the black market. They moved their research to maritime facilities and hidden bunkers in Russia, operating away from the reach of the law. The Raccoon trials were a tactical distraction that allowed the Vipers to escape the cage. The company was dead in the eyes of the public, but it was still breathing in the dark. The legal strategy was a clinical display of corporate power. Spencer realized that as long as the case was in the courts, he could not be arrested or extradited. He used his influence to delay the testimony of the STARS survivors and to discredit the physical evidence from the city. The organization was fighting for its life with the same ruthlessness it showed in the labs. They did not care about the truth. They only cared about the survival of the executive board. It was a war of papers and bribes that lasted for half a decade. However, the trials eventually exhausted the organization's resources. The constant legal fees and the bribery were draining the corporate coffers faster than they could be replenished. The international community was becoming increasingly impatient with the delays, leading to a global push for a final resolution. The Raccoon trials were the final defense of a dying empire, so they were the proof that the red and white logo was built on a foundation of lies. The judgment was coming, and it would be delivered by a mole. The trials also forced the company to stop its public pharmaceutical sales, cutting off their primary source of legitimate income. They were forced to rely on their illegal weapons trade to fund their legal defense. This made them even more vulnerable to international sanctions and military intervention. The organization was a giant that was being bled dry by the very system it had tried to control. The Raccoon trials were the final chapter of the company's life as a public entity. The giant was about to fall, and the world was ready to watch. Section 7, The Final Years. Part 31, Sergey Vladimir Takes Control. How Umbrella's last loyal soldier kept the company alive. From a Soviet oil refinery in the Caucasus, Sergey Vladimir emerged as the primary defender of the corporate legacy during the early years of the 2000 decade. As the legal walls closed in around the American and European branches, Sergey retreated to a secret facility in the Caucasus Mountains. This site was a massive refinery that had been repurposed into a biological stronghold for the remaining loyalists. Sergey was the last soldier who believed in the original vision of the founder. He used his private military experience to maintain the security of the remaining assets while the world demanded justice. He was the anchor of the dying giant. The Caucasus facility was a marvel of subterranean engineering, hidden away from any satellite surveillance or international intervention. It served as the central hub for the organization's final research projects and its most advanced military assets. Sergey used the UMF-013 supercomputer to manage the global data and the hidden accounts that funded the defense. He was a man of absolute discipline who viewed the Raccoon trials as a secondary annoyance to his mission. He believed that as long as the research survived, the company would eventually rise from the ashes. He was the master of the final lab. Sergey's control over the company was based on his genetic contribution and his tactical ruthlessness. He viewed the other executives as weak bureaucrats who had failed to protect the prehistoric fire. He purged the organization of anyone who showed signs of cowardice or betrayal during the legal crisis. The refinery became a fortress where the rules of the old world did not apply. Sergey was building a private army of clones and monsters to strike back at the heroes of Raccoon City. He was the guardian of the Spencer throne who refused to yield to the law. The refinery also functioned as a factory for the mass production of the T-103 Tyrant models. Sergey realized that the company needed a physical force to maintain its influence on the global black market. He moved the production lines from the destroyed Sheena Island to the safety of the Russian mountains. The facility was a closed system where the biological horror was produced with industrial efficiency. Sergey watched over the labs like a modern czar, his absolute power backed by the lethal creatures he had helped to create. He was the soldier who gave his soul to the company. As the enforcer of the founder, Sergey was tasked with the elimination of the STARS survivors and the recovery of the lost data. He sent his private security teams to hunt Jill and Chris across the globe, hoping to silence the witnesses before the final judgment. Sergey was a man who understood the value of silence in a world of leaks. He was the one who ensured that the secrets of the African facility and the Project W experiment remained buried in the digital archives. He was the final barrier between the truth and the public. The years in the Caucasus were a time of desperate survival for the organization. Sergey had to manage a shrinking budget and a growing list of enemies. He turned to the illegal arms trade to fund the operations at the refinery, selling bioweapons to any syndicate with enough capital. This pragmatism allowed the company to breathe for a few more years, even as the global courts ordered the seizure of its assets. Sergey was the architect of a secret peace, a man who held the end of the world in his hands from a mountain in Russia. Sergey's leadership was the final chapter of the original corporate structure. He represented the total integration of the military and the scientific goals of the organization. He was a man who saw the virus as a tool for national and corporate restoration. His presence in the Caucasus kept the flame of the Progenitor virus alive during the darkest years of the trials. He was the loyal shield that protected the architect until the very end. The refinery was the tomb of the company's ambition, and Sergey was its final king. Part 32. The Spencer Rain Incident. The rogue researcher. The T and G virus missiles. Aimed at two governments, and the final blow to Umbrella's public reputation. The Spencer Rain Incident in 2002 represented the total breakdown of the internal hierarchy. Morpheus D. Duval was a researcher who had been discarded by the organization after the Raccoon City disaster. He sought a violent revenge by stealing a strain of the T and G virus from a laboratory in France. He hijacked a luxury cruise ship and threatened to launch missiles at global population centers. This was a tactical nightmare for the remaining executives. It proved that the company could no longer control its own biological weapons. Morpheus wanted to create a new world of beauty and biological perfection using the hybrid agent. He saw himself as the true successor to the Spencer legacy, a man who had the will to use the fire against the establishment. The incident on the ship was a violent display of the instability of the research. It showed that the bioweapons were now in the hands of individuals who had no corporate loyalty. The monopoly had turned into a global threat that targeted the very governments the company once bribed. The Vipers were now attacking the world. The hijacking of the cruise ship was a clinical operation that resulted in a total containment failure. The T-virus moved through the passenger decks, turning the elite guests into mindless zombies. Morpheus watched the chaos with a detached arrogance, him believing that he was overseeing the birth of a new age. He used the hybrid virus to mutate his own body, gaining superhuman speed and an electrical aura. He was the realization of the European vision for the G virus, a monster with a human intellect. He was the ghost of the pharmaceutical era. This incident was the final blow to the organization's public reputation during the trials. The international community realized that the company's assets were a ticking time bomb that could destroy the planet. The threat of viral missiles aimed at the United States and China made the dissolution of the company a global priority. Spencer was forced to disavow the actions of the rogue researcher, but the world no longer believed the lies. The Spencer reign was the funeral ship of the corporate existence. It was the end of the clean mask. The intervention of agents from the BSAA and the Chinese government stopped the launch of the missiles. They managed to infiltrate the ship and destroy the mutated Morpheus before he could reach the shore. The destruction of the Spencer reign removed the immediate threat, but the data remained. The incident proved that the viral strains were now mobile and accessible to anyone with enough ambition. The organization was no longer the master of the apocalypse. They were just one of many players in a game they had started. For the board of directors, the incident was a disaster that could not be buried. The legal investigators used the Spencer reign files to prove that the company was a threat to national security. The era of legal deadlock was ending, replaced by a global push for total bankruptcy. Spencer realized that his enforcers could no longer protect him from the consequences of his own research. The rogue researcher had shown the world that the umbrella did not protect anyone from the viral reign. It was a failure of the corporate soul. The legacy of the incident led to the formation of the DSO and the expansion of the anti-bioterrorism laws. The world was now on high alert for any mention of the red and white logo. The Spencer reign was a reminder that the fire was loose in the world. Hunk had delivered the sample to France, and Morpheus had used it to threaten the globe. Every new mutation was a direct result of the successful extraction in 1998. The company was dying, but its children were still hungry for power. Part 33, the Talos Project. Umbrella's last weapon, what it was designed to do, and how it ended. The organization's last hope for military relevance was the Talos project. This was a massive bioweapon armored in tank plating and controlled by a satellite-linked supercomputer. It was designed to be the ultimate anti-military bow, capable of taking down an entire army on its own. The Talos was the peak of the corporate vision for a controllable super soldier. It was a biological engine of destruction wrapped in modern steel. The researchers believed this weapon would secure their future on the global market. The project was managed by Sergey Vladimir in the Caucasus stronghold. He believed that the Talos would prove the organization's superiority to the world's governments. It was a weapon that could not be stopped by conventional infantry or armor. The organization planned to use the tyrant to hold the international community hostage and negotiate a new legal standing for the company. It was a desperate gamble for the survival of the brand. They wanted to prove that they were still the masters of the prehistoric fire. The Talos used the UMF-13 to provide the tactical intelligence for its combat maneuvers. This integration allowed the monster to react to battlefield changes with a computer precision. It was no longer a mindless zombie or a primitive hunter. It was a programmable soldier that possessed the physical power of a god. The armor protected the delicate viral core from standard munitions, making it nearly invincible in a direct engagement. It was the masterpiece of the Russian lab and the final shield of the board. The project ended in total failure during a raid by Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine in 2003. The two agents managed to infiltrate the Caucasus facility and destroy the monster in a final confrontation. The destruction of the tyrant proved that the human spirit was still stronger than the corporate biology. The organization had lost its ultimate weapon and its final chance for a comeback. The Talos was a monument to the failure of the Spencer vision. It was the end of the military era. The fall of the project marked the official end of the organization's physical operations. They no longer had the resources or the laboratories to build another super soldier. The remaining assets were destroyed or seized by the authorities during the raid. Sergey Vladimir watched as his masterpiece was reduced to scrap metal and viral sludge. The organization was now a ghost of a company, its military power erased by the heroes of Raccoon City. The last weapon had been broken in the snow. The data gathered from the combat was the only thing that survived the destruction. Wesker monitored the battle from a distance, recording how the Talos performed against the elite agents. He saw that the era of massive super soldiers was over, replaced by the need for more discreet and intelligent agents. The failure of the project provided the foundation for his own future research into the Ouroboros virus. The Talos was the last leaf on a dying tree. It was the final act of a project that started in the Arklay Lab. The destruction of the facility was the smoking gun that the global courts needed to finalize the bankruptcy. The presence of a massive super soldier in a Russian refinery was impossible to explain as illegal medical research. The organization was officially labeled as a bioterrorist entity, leading to the immediate seizure of all worldwide accounts. The Talos was the weapon that was supposed to save the company, but it ended up being the evidence that killed it. The architect's final hope was gone. Part 34. The UMF-13. This computer held the entire history of Umbrella's research. The UMF-13 was a supercomputer that stored the entire history of the organization's research. It held the data on every viral strain and every genetic experiment conducted over 30 years. It was the digital memory of the Spencer Empire. Sergey Vladimir used the computer to manage what was left of the company from the Caucasus stronghold. He believed that as long as the data existed, the red and white logo would never truly die. The computer was the digital soul of the giant. Albert Wesker knew that whoever controlled the UMF-13 would become the new king of the bioweapon market. He had spent years tracking the computer's location, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. To Wesker, the data was more valuable than any physical sample or laboratory. It was the blueprint for the future of human evolution and the foundation for his own godhood. He was a predator who wanted to own the memories of his creator. The computer was the ultimate prize in the global game. The UMF-013 contained the secrets of the Indipaya ruins, the G virus discovery, and the Project W files. It was a library of biological horror that could be used to build a new world of mutation. Wesker realized that by seizing the data, he could bypass decades of research and move straight to the final stage of his plan. He wanted to turn the company's history into his own private arsenal. The computer was the key to the next decade of global bioterrorism. It was the brain of the monster. During the raid on the Russian facility in 2003, Wesker successfully infiltrated the computer room. He engaged in a final duel with Sergey Vladimir, the man who guarded the digital archives. After killing the colonel, Wesker initiated a total download of the system. He watched as the decades of corporate secrets flowed into his private servers. He had stolen the mind of the organization. The company was now truly dead. Pharm and Wesker was the only heir to the prehistoric fire. The download also included the evidence of the company's involvement in the Raccoon City disaster. Wesker planned to use this information as a political lever to bring down the remaining executives. He was not interested in justice. He was interested in a total cleanup of the competition. By leaking the data anonymously, he could destroy the company and emerge as the only survivor with the power to continue the research. He was the shadow broker of the new age. The computer was his throne. The UMF-13 was eventually destroyed by the facility's self-destruct sequence. The physical hardware was reduced to ash, but the data lived on in Wesker's hands. He had achieved the ultimate theft in corporate history. The organization had been erased from the digital world, leaving no trace for the authorities to find. The only person who knew the truth was the man who had betrayed the company he served. The computer was the last secret of the Spencer era. It was the end of the archive. This theft ensured that the biological threat would never be fully contained. Wesker used the data to build his own global network, selling information to companies like Tricell while he prepared his own reset. The world was now facing a threat that was faster and smarter than the original company. The UMF-013 was the source of the global epidemic that would follow. The Reaper had taken the soul of the giant and turned it into a weapon. The digital legacy was the final blow to the world's safety. Section 8, The Fall, Part 35. Wesker's Testimony, 2003. The anonymous evidence that finally brought the company down in 2003. The long legal deadlock of the Raccoon trials was finally broken. Albert Wesker leaked the files from the UMF-013 to the international authorities anonymously. This provided the smoking gun evidence that proved the organization was directly responsible for the destruction of the city. The data included internal memos, research logs, and security reports that had been hidden for years. This was the final judgment that the world had been waiting for. The company could no longer hide behind its lawyers. The testimony was a cold and calculated move by the former captain. He wanted to ensure that the organization was completely dismantled, so he could operate without interference. By providing the authorities with the truth, he turned the legal system into a tool for his own agenda. The executives who had spent millions on bribery were now facing immediate arrest and total ruin. The red and white umbrella was officially recognized as a symbol of criminal conspiracy. The giant was brought down by its own history. The leaked data revealed the scale of the company's influence over the local and federal governments. It showed how they had bought police chiefs and mayors to protect their illegal labs. This revelation caused a massive political scandal that reached the highest levels of power. The organization was no longer just a failing business, it was an enemy of the state. The anonymous testimony provided the leverage needed to freeze every worldwide asset. The era of the pharmaceutical giant was officially over. Wesker watched from the shadows as the organization he had served for 20 years was dismantled by the law. He had delivered the final blow with a clinical indifference. He did not care about the justice for the people of Raccoon City. He only cared about the destruction of the old order to make room for his own. The testimony was the last act of his betrayal. He had used the company's own memories to kill it. The architect was now a fugitive in his own kingdom. The evidence also led to the identification of the remaining secret labs in Russia and Europe. The international community authorized a series of military raids to secure the biological materials. The world was finally taking action against the threat of the viral research. Wesker's testimony had started a global cleanup that he intended to exploit for his own gain. He was the one who had turned the light on in the dark room. He was the master of the legal end. The organization tried to discredit the leaked files, but the volume of the data was too overwhelming. The evidence was backed by the testimony of the STARS survivors and the findings from the Caucasus raid, the company was forced into a state of total bankruptcy within months of the leak. The Raccoon trials had reached their definitive conclusion. The red and white logo was erased from the global market. The giant had fallen, and the world was finally safe from the original umbrella. This event marked the transition to a new era of biological warfare. The central power of the organization was gone, but the fire was now in the hands of a ghost. Wesker possessed the true legacy of the company, while the public celebrated a hollow victory. The testimony was a tactical move that cleared the board for the next stage of the viral evolution. The company was dead, but the Reaper was just getting started. The final judgment was just the beginning of the next horror. Part 36, The Russian Stronghold and Sergey Vladimir. Umbrella's last stand, and how Wesker ended it. The Russian facility in the Caucasus served as the site of the organization's last stand. In 2003, Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine led an international raid on the mountain stronghold. They were determined to destroy the Talos project and secure the remaining viral data. At the same time, Jean-Albert Wesker infiltrated the base for his own private objective. The facility was a war zone where the past and the future of the company collided. It was the final battle for the soul of the giant. Sergey Vladimir personally led the defense of the refinery. He unleashed his clone army and his most dangerous bow assets against the elite agents. He was a man who refused to accept the end of his company and his dream. The battle moved through the subterranean tunnels and the high-tech labs of the fortress. Sergey was the final obstacle in the way of the truth. He was the loyal soldier who stood in the fire until the very end. The last stand was a display of desperate military power. While Chris and Jill fought the Talos, Wesker reached the inner sanctum of the facility to confront Sergey. This was the final duel between the two most powerful men in the organization. Sergey mutated into a massive monster to protect the UMF-013, but he was no match for the superhuman speed of his rival. Wesker killed the last loyal soldier with a cold efficiency. He had ended the physical existence of the company with a single strike. The Reaper had taken the throne. The death of Sergey Vladimir was the definitive end of the corporate hierarchy. There was no one left to lead the security forces or to manage the global research. The organization was now a leaderless body that was being consumed by the flames. Wesker initiated the self-destruct sequence and escaped with the downloaded data. The Russian stronghold was reduced to a pile of rubble in the snow. The physical legacy of the Spencer era was officially erased from the planet. The raid was a success for the agents and the international community. They had destroyed the last weapon and the last fortress of the pharmaceutical giant. The world believed that the threat was over. However, the true prize had been stolen by the man who disappeared into the mist. Wesker was the only winner of the Russian campaign. He had used the BSAA to provide the distraction he needed to secure the digital soul of the company. The last stand was a victory for the mole. The destruction of the refinery also meant that the remaining employees and clones were liquidated. There were no witnesses left to tell the story of the Caucasus facility. The organization had been silenced by its own most successful product. Sergey's loyalty had been rewarded with a betrayal that ended the company he loved. He was a relic of an era that had been outpaced by the ambition of a god. The last stand was a tragedy of corporate devotion. The giant was gone. The aftermath of the raid led to the total dissolution of the brand. The global courts recognized that the organization had been operating a secret military facility on foreign soil. This was the final proof of the company's total disregard for international law. The Russian stronghold was the final chapter in the history of the original umbrella. The red and white logo was buried under the mountain. The era of the giant was over, but the era of the ghost had begun. Part 37, Bankruptcy and Dissolution, 2003. The official end of Umbrella and what it immediately unleashed. In late 2003, the global courts issued the final judgment against the organization. The company was officially declared bankrupt and ordered to be dissolved immediately. Every worldwide asset, from the pharmaceutical labs to the secret accounts, was seized by the authorities. The red and white umbrella was removed from every building and every product. The corporation that had ruled the world for 30 years was dead. This was the official end of the Spencer Empire. The giant had finally been dismantled by the law. The dissolution of the company immediately unleashed a new wave of global instability. Thousands of researchers and security operatives found themselves without a job and without a master. These individuals possessed the most dangerous knowledge in human history. They became homeless assets who began to look for buyers on the black market. The expertise that was once contained within a single giant was now scattered across the globe. This was the start of the era of the freelance bioterrorist. The fire was in many hands. The viral samples and the research files were also leaked into the illegal trade. With the central authority gone, the security of the hidden labs was compromised. Black market brokers began to sell the T-virus and the tyrant blueprints to terrorist groups and rogue nations. The bioweapon monopoly had turned into a global bazaar of death. The world was now facing a threat that was decentralized and impossible to track. The end of the company was the start of the epidemic. The bankruptcy also created a power vacuum in the pharmaceutical industry. Smaller companies began to scramble for the remains of the organization's legal business. They bought the patents for the common medicines and the research on the legitimate vaccines. This led to the rise of new giants like Tricell and Wilpharma. These companies inherited the resources of the old world, but carried their own secret ambitions. The corporate culture of the organization had survived the death of the brand. The vipers were still in the grass. For the survivors of Raccoon City, the dissolution was a hollow victory. While the company was legally dead, the damage was already done. The viruses were loose, and the man responsible was still at large. The world had entered a state of constant biological fear that would define the next 2 decades. The umbrella had fallen, but the rain of mutation was still falling on the innocent. The end of the organization was just the transition to a more dangerous age. Just the giant had left a graveyard behind it. The global security network had to be completely rebuilt to handle the post-umbrella world. The formation of the BSAA was a direct response to the flood of bioweapons onto the black market. The international community realized that the threat was no longer contained within a single corporate entity. They had to fight a war against 1,000 small enemies. The dissolution had changed the nature of the conflict from a legal trial to a global manhunt. The Reaper was leading the way into the darkness. The official end of the organization was a signal to the world that the pharmaceutical era was over. The science of the Progenitor virus was now a matter of national and global security. The courts had erased the logo, but they could not erase the biology. The legacy of the 1966 expedition was now the permanent reality of the human race. The giant was dead, but its blood was in the water. The world was waiting for the next mutation to appear on the horizon. Part 38. Spencer in hiding. The years after the collapse, the worldwide manhunt, and the estate where Wesker finally found him. Following the collapse of his empire in 2003, Oswell E. Spencer became a ghost. He retreated to his private European estate, a massive and ancient mansion hidden away from the world. He was a frail and dying man who was being hunted by every major government and the BSAA. The worldwide manhunt lasted for several years, but the founder's resources and his network of loyalists kept him invisible. He watched from the shadows as the world he had built was dismantled. He was the architect of the ruins. Spencer spent his final years in a state of clinical isolation. He was surrounded by the remnants of his research and the memories of his children. He realized that his dream of a master race was being achieved not by himself, but by the creation he had raised. He waited for the return of Albert Wesker, knowing that the son would eventually come to claim his inheritance. He saw himself as a god who was waiting for the final act of his own play. He was a man who had traded the world for a chance to live forever. The European estate was a sanctuary of old-world luxury and biological secrets. It was guarded by the last of the corporate loyalists who remained dedicated to the founder's vision. Spencer monitored the global bioterrorism market. She's seeing his viral strains being used by lesser men for primitive goals. He felt a deep contempt for the world that had rejected him. He believed that he was still the only one with the right to rule the species. He was the shadowed king of a kingdom that no longer existed. In 2006, the manhunt finally reached its conclusion. Albert Wesker tracked down his father to the estate, entering the private study of the man who had stolen his childhood. Spencer was waiting for him, sitting in a wheelchair and clutching the files of Project W. He was not afraid of the Reaper. He was proud of the monster he had built. He expected Wesker to serve him as the loyal heir to the throne. He did not realize that a god has no use for a human master. The final confrontation between the creator and the creation was a brief and violent event. G. Spencer revealed the truth of the Wesker children and the eugenics dream, expecting a reconciliation. Instead, he found only the cold logic of the predator he had manufactured. Wesker killed the founder with a single strike, ending the life of the man who had started it all. The architect had been erased by his own masterpiece. The estate became a tomb for the original Umbrella vision. The giant was truly gone. Spencer's death marked the end of the 1960 decade legacy. The man who had found the Progenitor virus and built the global empire was now just a corpse on a cold floor. He had spent his life trying to become a god, but he died as a fragile old man who had lost everything. His legacy was a world of monsters and a son who wanted to burn it all down. The estate was eventually raided by the BSAA, but the secrets of the founder were already gone. The Reaper had taken the soul of the architect. The years in hiding were the final proof of Spencer's total detachment from reality. He believed that his ideology was more important than the lives of the millions he had destroyed. He saw the collapse of his company as a temporary setback in the evolution of the species. He died believing that he had won the war for the future. He was a man who lived in a dream of his own making, and he died in the nightmare he had shared with the world. The shadow was finally gone from the estate. Part 39. Elpis, the secret antivirus. Spencer. Built in his final years and what it says about whether he regretted everything. In his final years of hiding, Spencer developed a secret project known as Elpis. This was a universal cure, or a total antivirus designed to neutralize the viral strains he had spent his life creating. The data on Elpis was hidden in the private servers of the European estate, away from the prying eyes of the BSAA. This project has led to an intense debate among the law experts regarding the founder's final motivations. Did the architect of the apocalypse finally regret the destruction he had caused? Some believe that Elpis was a last-minute attempt at redemption. As Spencer faced his own mortality, he may have realized the horror of the world he was leaving behind. The antivirus was a tool that could have ended the era of global bioterrorism and restored the natural order of the species. It was a gift to the humanity he had once despised. If this theory is true, it means that the man who started the fire spent his last days trying to find the water to put it out. However, a more cynical view suggests that Elpis was just another tool for biological control. Spencer understood that the one who owns the cure owns the world even more than the one who owns the virus. By building a universal antivirus, he could hold the ultimate power over life and death. He could decide which nations were saved and which were allowed to mutate. Elpis was not a gift of mercy. It was a final lever of political and biological dominance. It was the architect's last insurance policy. The antivirus also represented Spencer's total lack of faith in the natural evolution of the species. He believed that even his own viruses were too volatile for a stable new world. He wanted a way to reset the biological slate whenever he chose. Elpis was the ultimate proof of his God complex, a tool that allowed him to erase the errors of his own research. He was a man who wanted the power to play both the judge and the savior. He was the master of the loop. The project was never fully completed before Wesker's arrival at the estate. The data remained as a theoretical blueprint for a world that could have been. The BSAA recovered the files during the raid, but the technical requirements for the antivirus were too complex for their own researchers. Elpis remains one of the great what-ifs of the series. It was the final secret of a man who lived and died in a world of absolute secrecy. It was the breath of hope from a house of death. What Elpis says about Spencer is that he was a man who never stopped thinking about control. Whether it was through a virus or a cure, he wanted to be the one who decided the fate of the planet. He did not care about the human cost of his experiments. He only cared about the mathematical perfection of his vision. The antivirus was the final equation in a life of cold calculations. He died before he could use it, leaving the world to suffer from the fire he had fueled for 50 years. The legacy of Elpis is a reminder that the architect was always one step ahead of the rest of the world. He understood the biological landscape better than anyone, and he knew that the era of Umbrella was just the beginning. The antivirus was his final word on the species he had tried to evolve. It was a tool of absolute power that died with its creator. The world is still waiting for a cure that Spencer had already built in his mind. He was the father of the disease and the keeper of the cure. Section 9, What Umbrella Left Behind, Part 40, The Black Market, Every Virus, BW, and Research File that escaped into the world after the company fell. The Black Market became the primary destination for the viral research after the dissolution of the organization in 2003. With the central authority of the company erased, hundreds of researchers found themselves without a master and without a paycheck. They took their samples and their data to the highest bidders on the global stage. This led to an era of global bioterrorism, where the T-virus was sold like a conventional weapon. The monopoly was gone, but the fire was everywhere. Every major project, from the tyrant blueprints to the G-virus data, became a commodity on the illegal market. Terrorist groups, rogue nations, and rival pharmaceutical companies scrambled to secure the remains of the Spencer Empire. This led to a wave of undocumented outbreaks and biological incidents across the globe. The expertise that was once contained within a single giant was now scattered across 1,000 small enemies. The world was now facing a threat that was decentralized and impossible to contain. The black market also saw the rise of the shadow brokers who managed the trade of biological secrets. These individuals acted as the middlemen between the researchers and the buyers, ensuring that the prehistoric fire continued to burn. Albert Wesker was the most successful of these brokers, using his stolen data from the UMF-013 to control the market from the shadows. He ensured that no government or agency could ever fully erase the legacy of the red and white logo. He was the king of the ruins. The availability of the viruses led to a series of horrific attacks on civilian populations during the 2010s. From the Terra Grigia panic to the Kijuju incident, the world was forced to face the reality of the post-Umbrella era. The viruses were now the new nuclear weapons, capable of destroying a city with a single vial. The global security network was always one step behind the market. The organization had been destroyed, but its blood was now in the water of every nation on the planet. Research files from the Antarctic base and the Russian stronghold were also leaked to the highest bidders. This led to the creation of new viral strains like the T-Abyss and the C virus. Every new biological threat could trace its genetic history back to the work done by Marcus and Birkin. The science of the organization had become the permanent foundation for the next generation of horror. The black market was the laboratory where the company's mistakes were refined and mass-produced. The legacy of the black market is a world that lives in a state of constant biological fear. The public no longer trusts the pharmaceutical industry or the international agencies. They know that a monster could appear on their street corner at any moment. The dissolution of the company had not ended the threat. It had only made it more accessible to the worst of humanity. The fire that Spencer found in Africa had become a global inferno. The giant had left a graveyard behind it, and the gravediggers were now the masters of the world. The authorities continue to hunt for the remaining samples and the brokers who sell them. However, the market is too vast and too hidden to be fully dismantled. The viruses are now a part of the global economy, a dark trade that fuels the ambitions of the elite. The black market is the final proof of the organization's total success. They had changed the world forever, not through evolution, but through the industrialization of death. The umbrella was gone, but the reign was now universal. Part 41. Wesker steals. The data, what he took from Umbrella's archives and what he planned to do with it. Albert Wesker emerged from the Russian ruins as the most powerful individual in the history of biological warfare. He possessed the total contents of the UMF-013 supercomputer, which contained every secret the organization had ever hidden. This digital treasure included the genetic maps for the Tyrant project and the original data from the African gardens. Wesker did not simply want to sell this information for a profit. He planned to use the archives to build a new world where he was the only god. He was the shadow broker of the prehistoric fire. The data provided Wesker with the blueprints for every viral strain ever discovered by the founders. He took the research of James Marcus and William Birkin and began to refine it for his own tactical purposes. Wesker realized that the original organization had failed because of its corporate bureaucracy and its internal friction. He intended to operate with a clinical efficiency that Spencer never achieved. The archives were the foundation for his own Ouroboros project, which would move beyond the limitations of the stagnant T virus. Wesker used the stolen data to manipulate the remaining pharmaceutical companies and the various global syndicates. He would leak small pieces of research to encourage competition, while he kept the most valuable secrets for himself. This strategy ensured that the global bioterrorism market remained in a state of constant evolution. Wesker was the master of the information war, using the ghost of his former employer to distract his enemies. He was the only person who knew the true scale of the biological threat. He planned to use the G virus and the T Veronica samples to create a hybrid agent that was inescapable for the human species. The archives gave him the technical knowledge to merge different organisms without the risk of a cellular collapse. Wesker was no longer a researcher. He was a biological architect who was building the end of the world. He moved his operations to a mobile laboratory, always staying one step ahead of the BSAA auditors. He was the digital heir to the Spencer throne. The theft of the data also allowed Wesker to identify the remaining survivors of the Project W experiment. He used the files to track down his sister, Alex Wesker, and to monitor her progress on Sonido de Tortuga. The archives were a map of the family history that Spencer had tried to erase. Wesker intended to be the final survivor who would claim the total legacy for himself. He was the one who had taken the heart of the giant and put it into a new body. Ultimately, the data was the weapon that Wesker used to destroy the old world. He saw the history of the organization as a record of human failure that he was destined to fix. He did not care about the millions of lives that were lost in the labs. To Wesker, the data was the only truth in a world of lies. He had achieved the ultimate theft, and he was ready to use it to trigger the final evolution. He was the god of the ruins, armed with the memories of a dead corporation. Section 10, Tricell, Part 42. The Travis Enterprises Connection. The company that became Tricell and its long history. With Umbrella's research, Tricell was not a new entity in the biological market. It was the evolution of a centuries-old trading company known as Travis Enterprises. This organization had a long and hidden history with the initial research of the Progenitor virus. Henry Travis, a member of the founding family, had explored the African continent in the 19th century and recorded the location of the Depaya ruins. His journals provided the maps that Spencer and Marcus used to find the Stairway of the Sun. Tricell was the silent partner in the discovery of the prehistoric fire. The company was divided into 3 distinct branches: shipping, natural resources, and pharmaceuticals. This diversified structure allowed Tricell to operate with a level of secrecy and power that rivaled the original organization. While the public saw them as a global leader in trade and energy, their pharmaceutical division was secretly building a biological empire. They had funded the 1966 expedition, but allowed the other founders to take the heat for the illegal research. They were the jackals waiting in the long grass. The Travis family had spent decades monitoring the progress of the T virus and the G virus from a distance. They recognized that the biological market was the future of global power. When the original giant began to collapse in 2003, Tricell was perfectly positioned to seize the remaining assets. They bought up the hidden labs and recruited the homeless researchers who were looking for a new master. They were the corporate heirs to the Spencer legacy, operating with a much cleaner public image. Their history with the African ruins gave Tricell a unique advantage in the post-2003 era. They knew that the original source of the virus was still hidden in the subterranean gardens. while the rest of the world focused on the ruins of Raccoon City. Tricell was looking back to the beginning. They wanted to reclaim the Indipire facility and use modern technology to refine the Progenitor virus. They were the architects of a second corporate era, built on the foundations of a forgotten exploration. The company also possessed a massive maritime fleet that allowed them to move biological materials across the world with ease. This was a legacy of their shipping branch, which had once worked closely with the Paraguay's line. Tricell had the logistics and the funding to become the new global giant. They were the silent engine of the bioterrorism market, providing the resources for every major syndicate. They were the company that turned the prehistoric fire into a modern industrial product. Tricell's hypocrisy was the core of their business model. They presented themselves as a responsible corporate citizen while they were building the tools of mass destruction. This duality allowed them to influence the international community and the BSAA from within. They were the ultimate vipers in the garden, using the trust of the world to hide their own biological ambition. The Travis connection was the secret thread that tied the old organization to the new horror. They were the company that never stopped hunting for godhood. Part 43, Tricell's Hypocrisy. The company that helped found the BSAA while secretly running its own BOW program. One of the most profound acts of corporate hypocrisy was Tricell's role in the founding of the BSAA. The company provided the initial funding and the technical resources to create the International Anti-Bioterrorism Agency. This made them look like global heroes who were dedicated to fixing the mistakes of the past. The public and the UN trusted the company to help clean up the viral load. In reality, Tricell was using the BSAA as a shield to protect their own secret BOW program from any independent investigation. The company used its position within the agency to monitor the movements of the elite agents and the status of the global outbreaks. They could redirect the BSAA teams away from their own secret laboratories and toward their competitors. This allowed Tricell to dismantle rival syndicates while they continued their own research in absolute safety. They were the judge and the criminal at the same time. The agency was a tool for corporate espionage disguised as a mission for global security. Behind this public mask, the company was running a massive biological program in Africa and Europe. They were refining the T-virus and developing new assets like the Popocaramu and the Ndesu. Sure, these monsters were sold to terrorist groups and rogue governments, fueling the very outbreaks the BSAA was sent to stop. Tricell was profiting from both sides of the war, selling the disease and the cure. They were the masters of the closed loop of industrial bioterrorism. This hypocrisy extended to their high-level executives, specifically Exella Gione. She used her family status to manipulate the board of directors and secure the funding for her private projects. Exella saw the company as a vehicle for her own ascension, partnering with Wesker to achieve a goal that surpassed corporate profit. She did not care about the ethics of the agency or the lives of the soldiers. She was a woman who lived in a world of absolute arrogance and corporate betrayal. The discovery of the Tricell corruption during the Kijuju incident was a catastrophic blow to the global security network. It proved that the primary funder of the BSAA was actually the largest producer of biological weapons. The agency realized that they had been used as a private security force for a criminal syndicate. This revelation shattered the trust of the international community and led to a total restructuring of the anti-bioterrorism laws. Tricell had turned the hope of a safe world into a corporate lie. Ultimately, the The company's fall showed that the viral market was too corrupt to be self-regulated. The Vipers would always find a way to hide their research behind a clean logo. Tricell's legacy is one of total institutional failure, a reminder that the giants of the pharmaceutical industry cannot be trusted with the prehistoric fire. They had taken the eugenics dream of Spencer and turned it into a profitable business model. They were the company that almost owned the world through the power of a fake apology. Part 44, Wesker and Alexia Gione, the partnership that gave Tricell access to the original Progenitor facility. The partnership between Albert Wesker and Alexia Gione was the catalyst for the second major era of biological research. Alexia was a gifted geneticist and a member of the Travis family who wanted to claim her rightful place at the head of the company. Wesker used her ambition to gain access to the massive resources and the logistical network of Tricell. In exchange, he provided her with the stolen data from the UMF-013 and a promise of shared godhood. It was a union of cold intellect and desperate vanity. Alexia used her executive power to restart the original Progenitor facility in Africa, which had been sealed by Spencer in the 1990 decade. With Wesker's tactical guidance, Tricell moved into the Indapaya ruins and began a new era of harvesting the Sonnentrepper flowers. This gave them a fresh supply of the ancient virus, allowing them to refine the material with modern technology. The partnership had successfully bypassed the shutdown and reclaimed the source of the organization's power. They were the new masters of the African garden. Wesker viewed Alexia as a useful tool for his own Ouroboros project. He manipulated her desire for power and her personal attraction to ensure that he had absolute control over the company's labs. While Alexia believed she was building a new empire with a partner, Wesker was building a throne for himself. He used the Tricell research to stabilize the Ouroboros virus, using the Progenitor material as the fundamental base. He was a predator who had found the perfect host for his industrial ambitions. The partnership led to the creation of a massive subterranean laboratory beneath the African wetlands. This facility was the birth of the Magini and the other advanced BOW assets seen in the Kajuju incident. Alexia oversaw the human experiments, viewing the local population as a disposable resource for her scientific ascension. She had fully embraced the cold social Darwinism of the Spencer era. She believed that she was the queen of the new evolution, standing at the side of a digital god. However, the partnership ended in a total and clinical betrayal. Once the Ouroboros virus was perfected, Wesker had no further use for Alexia or the company. During the final confrontation with Chris Redfield, Wesker injected Alexia with the virus, watching with indifference as she mutated into a mindless and grotesque monster. She had been consumed by the very power she had helped to unlock. The partnership was a lie that resulted in the total destruction of the woman and the brand. The fall of Alexia was the final sign of Wesker's total detachment from humanity. He did not care about the family name or the corporate legacy. He only cared about the global reset that he was about to trigger. The partnership had served its purpose by giving him the resources to build his weapon. Tricell was just another stepping stone in his long climb toward godhood. The company had provided the ladder, and Wesker had burned it once he reached the top. He was the only god in the laboratory. Part 45, the Ouroboros Project. What Tricell was actually building in Africa, and what Wesker planned to do with it. The Ouroboros Project was the final fulfillment of the eugenics vision that began with the 1966 expedition. Tricell used their African laboratory to refine the Ouroboros virus, a strain derived from the original Progenitor material. This virus was designed to be the ultimate filter for the human species. Unlike the T virus, which created mindless zombies, Ouroboros was meant to select only the genetically superior individuals. If a person was found worthy, the virus would integrate with their DNA and grant them superhuman powers. If they were found lacking, the virus would consume their body in a mass of black tentacles. Wesker planned to use a high-altitude bomber to release the Ouroboros virus into the global atmosphere. He wanted to trigger a planetary culling that would decide the fate of the human race in a single day. He believed that the current population was a stagnant and weak race that needed to be purified through biological fire. The project was not about conquest or profit. It was about a total reset of the species. Wesker wanted to be the father of a new world populated only by the gifted. He was the architect of the final evolution. The project required a massive amount of the Progenitor virus to maintain its stability. Tricell scientists worked around the clock to harvest the flowers and process the viral material in the subterranean labs. They faced constant failure as the virus proved to be incredibly aggressive and difficult to control. It was a prehistoric force that refused to be tamed by modern machines. Every successful sample was bought with the lives of thousands of test subjects. The project was a mountain of corpses built in the middle of the African desert. Wesker's vision for the world after Ouroboros was a cold and silent paradise of superior beings. He did not care about the culture or the history of the old world. He saw humanity as a biological error that needed to be corrected by a superior intellect. The project was the ultimate expression of the Project W indoctrination. He was doing exactly what Spencer had raised him to do, but on a scale that the founder could never have managed. He was the son who had finally surpassed the father. The physical nature of the virus was a nightmare of organic thrashing and black sludge. It showed that the prehistoric fire was a predator that viewed the human body as nothing more than fuel. Even the superior candidates faced a high risk of being consumed by the viral load. The project was a gamble with the survival of the entire species. Wesker was willing to bet everything on a single roll of the genetic dice. He was a man who had moved beyond the need for a world that he did not control. The BSAA's intervention in Kijuju was the only thing that stopped the global release. Chris Redfield and Shiva Alamar managed to infiltrate the facility and destroy the bomber before it could reach the target. The Ouroboros project ended in a volcanic fire, taking the last of the original Tricell research with it. Wesker was defeated by the very humanity he had tried to erase. The project was a failure of biological arrogance, a reminder that the species cannot be forced into a new form by a single madman. The fire was out, but the ash remained. Part 46. Tricell exposed and destroyed. The Kijuju incident and the second major corporate collapse. The Kijuju incident in 2009 resulted in the total exposure of the Tricell conspiracy. The international community witnessed the biological horror unleashed by the company in Africa. The death of Excella Gione and the destruction of the Ouroboros facility provided the smoking gun evidence that the company had been operating a secret BOW program. This led to a second major corporate collapse that rivaled the fall of the original organization in 2003. The giant was once again brought down by its own ambition. The bankruptcy of Tricell was a fast and messy event that shook the global economy. Every worldwide asset was seized by the UN and the various national governments. The board of directors was arrested and charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity. The company that had funded the BSAA was now recognized as the world's most dangerous bioterrorist entity. The mask of hypocrisy had been torn off. revealing a face of viral rot. The era of the pharmaceutical titan was officially over for the second time. The fallout of the collapse led to another wave of global instability in the biological market. Just like after the first giant fell, thousands of researchers and viral samples were scattered into the shadows. The black market was flooded with the remains of the Ouroboros and Progenitor research. This ensured that the threat of the ancient virus would continue to haunt the world for decades. The destruction of the company had not ended the fire. It had only spread the embers to new hands. The BSAA faced a period of intense scrutiny and internal auditing after the incident. The realization that they had been funded by the enemy caused a massive loss of public trust. The agency had to be completely restructured to ensure that no single company could ever control their operations again. This led to a more decentralized and transparent organization, but one that was constantly fighting a war on many fronts. The legacy of Tricell was a broken world and a battered defense. The Travis family name was erased from the global market, their centuries-old trading empire reduced to a footnote in the history of bioterrorism. The company that had found the prehistoric fire was finally consumed by it. The Kajuju incident was the definitive end of the industrial research era. The world realized that the giants of the pharmaceutical industry were too dangerous to exist without total oversight. The second collapse was a lesson that the world had to learn twice. Today, the ruins of the Tricell labs serve as a warning to the new generation of corporate leaders. The red and purple logo is a symbol of betrayal and biological madness. The company tried to build a throne in the African ruins and ended up building a grave for its own employees. The cycle of corporate research had reached its final and most violent conclusion. The giants were dead, but the ghost of their ambition was already moving into the next chapter of the story. Section 11, Neo Umbrella, Part 47, Carla Radames. The researcher who was turned into a clone of Ada Wong and what it did to her. Carla Radames was a brilliant researcher who possessed an intellectual capacity that rivaled the original founders. She was recruited by Derek Simmons, a high-level operative within the secret fraternity known as the Family. Carla was the architect of the C virus, a lethal agent designed to trigger rapid and extreme mutations in the human host. She was a woman of pure science who believed she was building a tool for global stability. However, her life was stolen by a man who was obsessed with a different woman. Simmons wanted a loyal version of the spy Ada Wong, and he decided to use Carla as his biological template. In a clinical act of betrayal, he used the C virus to reshape Carla's body and mind into a perfect clone of the woman he loved. Carla lost her original identity, her face, and her soul to the experiment. She became a biological mirror of a ghost. This violation was the spark that turned a brilliant scientist into the world's most dangerous and unstable bioterrorist. The transformation caused Carla to snap and seek the total destruction of the world and the man who betrayed her. She used her intellectual genius to build a new organization known as Neo Umbrella. This was not a company, but a cult of biological chaos dedicated to the end of the human species. Carla did not want to be a god or a queen. She wanted to be the architect of the final apocalypse. She wanted the ghost of the original organization to finish the job that Spencer had started. Carla operated with a deceptive brilliance, using the resources of the family to fund her global attacks. She launched the C virus missiles at Tall Oaks and Lanxiang, causing the largest outbreaks since the 1998 incident. She wanted to prove that she was superior to the original researchers by succeeding where they had failed. She was a woman of absolute vengeance, who viewed the entire human race as a sacrifice for her own pain. She was the most refined monster in the history of the franchise. The psychological damage of the cloning was total. Carla often drifted between her original self and the identity of Ada Wong, creating a fragmented and unpredictable personality. She was a woman who was haunted by her own reflection. This instability made her a dangerous variable that neither the BSAA nor the family could control. She was a force of nature driven by a broken heart and a viral fire. She had turned her stolen face into a brand of terror that haunted the globe. Ultimately, Carla's story is a tragedy of corporate and personal violation. She was a victim of the same eugenics madness that had built the original organization. Her death in 2013 marked the end of Neo Umbrella, but the damage she caused was permanent. She had released the C virus into the world, ensuring that the era of global outbreaks would never end. She was the woman who had died twice, once in the lab and once in the fire of her own creation. She was the clone who burned the world. Part 48, The Family and the C Virus. The secret US fraternity behind the bioweapon Carla used. The family was a secret fraternity within the United States government that had existed for centuries. They were the hidden hands that guided the political and economic stability of the nation. Their leader, Derek Simmons, believed that the world must be maintained through a balance of power and the strategic use of biological threats. They were the architects of the global security state, using their influence to manage the aftermath of the original organization's collapse. They were the masters of the status quo. The C virus was the ultimate tool for this secret fraternity. It was a refined agent that combined the T Veronica and G virus strains to create a pathogen that could be controlled through a satellite link. Simmons wanted a weapon that could be used to remove political obstacles and maintain the dominance of the United States. He viewed the virus as a necessary evil for the sake of the nation. The family was the group that funded the research and the labs where Carla Radames worked. However, the fraternity was eventually hijacked by Carla's own ambition. She used their resources and their safe houses to build Neo Umbrella right under the nose of Derek Simmons. She turned their weapon of stability into a weapon of total chaos. The family realized too late that they had cultivated a viper in their own nest. Their attempt to control the world through biology had resulted in the largest urban outbreaks in history. They were the victims of their own arrogance. The C virus outbreaks in Tall Oaks and Lanxiang were the definitive proof that the family had failed. The virus moved through the population with a speed and a lethality that surpassed any known agent. It created a wave of Javos soldiers and massive chrysalid mutations that overwhelmed the local military and the BSAA. The fraternity's secret weapon was now a public nightmare. They were forced to watch as their own assets were used to burn the cities they were supposed to protect. Simmons' obsession with the Ada Wong clone was the primary cause of the fraternity's collapse. He had prioritized a personal desire over the strategic interests of the group. This led to an internal civil war within the family, as different factions fought for control of the remaining assets. The fraternity was dismantled by the legal and physical fallout of the 2013 incident. They were the hidden architects who were finally exposed by the light of the viral fire. The legacy of the family is a world where the government is just as dangerous as the corporations. They proved that the hunger for power is not limited to the pharmaceutical industry. The C virus remains a permanent threat on the black market, a reminder of the secret society that tried to own the future. They were the ones who provided the funding for the final apocalypse. They were the fathers of the clone who destroyed the giant. Part 49. Why she used the umbrella. Name: the psychological warfare of resurrecting a dead corporation's brand. Carla Radames chose to use the name Neo-Umbrella as a form of psychological warfare against the family and the international community. She understood that the red and white logo was the most terrifying brand in human history. By resurrecting the name of a dead corporation, she tapped into the collective fear of the world's population. She wanted her enemies to believe that the giant had returned from the grave to finish its work. It was a clinical move to destabilize the global security network. Using the name was also a personal middle finger to Derek Simmons. He had spent years trying to clean up the legacy of the original company to build his own secret empire. By rebranding her terrorist cell as the new organization, Carla linked Simmons directly to the horrors of the past. She turned his own scientific history into a public scandal. She was mocking the man who had stolen her identity by wearing the face of his greatest failure. It was a war of brands and memories. The name Neo-Umbrella served as a rallying cry for the homeless researchers and the loyalists who had been discarded after 2003. It gave them a sense of purpose and a shared identity in a world that hated them. Carla built an army of scientists who wanted to see the world burn in the name of the original founders. The brand was a viral agent in itself, spreading through the dark web and the black market to recruit the best talent. She was building a kingdom of ghosts. Psychologically, the name forced the BSAA to react with a level of panic that played into Carla's hands. The agency was terrified of a return to the era of corporate bioweapons and global monopolies. They spent their resources hunting a shadow that didn't exist, while Carla moved her actual assets into position. The name was a perfect distraction that allowed the C-virus missiles to reach their targets. She was the master of the long game, using the past to own the future. The logo of Neo-Umbrella was a twisted version of the original crest, reflecting the fragmented mind of its creator. It represented a company that was no longer interested in profit or health, but in the total liquidation of the species. Carla had taken the social Darwinism of Spencer and turned it into a death cult. She wanted the ghost of the company to be the thing that finally finished off humanity. It was the ultimate expression of her nihilism and her pain. In the end, the use of the name proved that the organization could never truly die, as long as its history was remembered. It was a brand of trauma that would always haunt the human race. Carla had turned a corporate failure into a permanent nightmare. The name Neo-Umbrella is a reminder that the fire can be restarted by anyone with enough hatred and a stolen vial. It was the final legacy of the girl who was turned into a spy. Part 50, the global bioterrorism attacks, 2012 to 2013. What Neo-Umbrella unleashed and how far it spread. The global attacks in 2012 and 2013 represented the most massive biological disaster since the 1998 incident. Neo-Umbrella launched a coordinated strike using C-virus missiles against major urban centers in the United States and China. The town of Tall Oaks was erased by a viral cloud, followed by a full-scale invasion of the metropolis of Lanxiang. This was not a secret accident. It was a public declaration of war against the species. The world was facing a total containment failure on 3 different continents. The C virus was a masterpiece of biological engineering that combined the worst traits of the previous strains. It allowed the infected to mutate into Javo, soldiers who could use tactical weapons and follow complex battle plans. This created a biological army that could fight a modern military on equal terms. The virus also produced massive chrysalids that hatched into giant monsters like the Ogroman and the Ustanak. Neo Umbrella had turned the population into a self-sustaining engine of destruction. The infection spread with a speed that overwhelmed the BSAA and the local authorities. Within hours, entire city blocks were transformed into cocoons and battlegrounds. The attacks caused a total breakdown of the global order, leading to a state of emergency in every major nation. The world realized that the threat of the viral research had reached its final and most lethal stage. Neo Umbrella was not just a terrorist group. It was a planetary parasite that was consuming the civilization. Lanxiang became the primary target for the final culling. Carla Radames launched a series of missiles from a hijacked aircraft carrier, intending to turn the city into a global epicenter for the infection. The battle for the city was a meat grinder that claimed the lives of thousands of soldiers and millions of civilians. The BSAA had to deploy its entire global strength to prevent a total planetary collapse. It was the largest and most expensive operation in the history of the Alliance. The attacks also targeted the political leadership of the United States. The infection in Tall Oaks resulted in the death of the president and the exposure of the family's involvement in the viral research. This caused a massive internal scandal that dismantled the secret fraternity and left the nation in a state of political paralysis. Carla had successfully struck at the heart of the global power structure. She had used the C virus to rewrite the map of the world in blood and mutation. The global attacks were the definitive proof that the organization's legacy was a weapon of mass destruction. The prehistoric fire was no longer contained in a lab or an island. It was a global phenomenon that could appear anywhere at any time. Neo Umbrella had shown the world that the apocalypse was a matter of logistics and will. The 2013 incident was the final judgment on the human species. It was a fire that burned through every border and every law. Part 51. Carla's death and Neo Umbrella's collapse. How the organization ended and what survived it. The collapse of Neo Umbrella began with the death of Carla Radames in 2013. She was killed by the real Ada Wong and the operatives of the family during the battle for the aircraft carrier. Before her death, Carla injected herself with an enhanced strain of the C virus, mutating into a massive and grotesque being that threatened to consume the ship. Her end was a visceral display of the madness that had driven her entire project. She died as a mindless monster, a final victim of her own biological genius. Without Carla's central intelligence and her scientific leadership, the organization shattered into a dozen leaderless factions. The BSAA and the local militaries were able to systematically dismantle the remaining cells and secure the viral samples. Neo Umbrella was a house built on the hatred of a single woman, and it could not survive her absence. The organization vanished from the global stage as quickly as it had appeared. The ghost of the giant was put back into the grave. However, the legacy of the C virus remained as a permanent threat to the world. The samples and the data were sold on the black market to various extremist groups and rogue nations. This ensured that the era of global outbreaks would continue for decades to come. The virus was too powerful and too adaptable to be fully erased from the planet. Carla had successfully delivered the prehistoric fire to a new generation of killers. The world was now facing a threat that was permanently decentralized. The collapse also left a vacuum in the global bioterrorism market that was filled by smaller syndicates like the Connections. These groups focused on the domestic and covert use of biological agents. avoiding the massive public attacks of the Neo-Umbrella era. They moved the war back into the shadows of the mansions and the swamps. The world had entered a state of constant biological surveillance, where every new infection was monitored by the international agencies. The fire was no longer an explosion, it was a slow burn. The death of Carla also ended the immediate threat of the family. The fraternity was dismantled by the legal and physical fallout of the Simmons scandal. The hidden hands that had guided the United States for centuries were finally cut off by the very monsters they had funded. The world was now a more chaotic and unpredictable place, with no central authority to manage the global stability. The era of the secret societies had been ended by the era of the viral clone. Today, the name Neo-Umbrella is a reminder of the danger of personal vengeance in the world of science. Carla Radames had turned her pain into a global catastrophe, she proving that a single broken mind is more lethal than any viral strain. The organization was a tragedy of identity and betrayal that nearly ended the human race. The ghost of the giant is still whispering in the dark, a reminder that the umbrella will always return to haunt the rain. The cycle is ready to restart. Section 12, Blue Umbrella, Part 52, founded 2007, how the American branch of the original company rebuilt under a different color. Blue Umbrella was founded in 2007 by a group of former employees who wanted to atone for the organization's sins. They realized that the brand was a symbol of total horror, and they wanted to reclaim the name for the benefit of humanity. The company was legally allowed to exist only under a strict set of international regulations and UN oversight. They were prohibited from conducting any offensive research or producing any bioweapons. Their mandate was the total containment and eradication of the biological threat they had helped to create. The company rebranded with a blue logo to signify their new mission and their distance from the red era of Spencer and Marcus. They focused on the development of anti-BOW technology and specialized vaccines to counter the viral strains on the black market. Blue Umbrella became a technical partner for the BSAA, providing them with high-level gear and logistical support in the field. They were the good branch of the organization, a group of researchers who wanted to fix the world they had broken. This rebuilding process was met with intense suspicion from the survivors of Raccoon City and the international community. Many believed that the company was just a front for the continued research of the prehistoric fire. They saw the blue logo as a cynical PR move to gain legal access to the viral samples. However, the company managed to prove its value through a series of successful operations and technological breakthroughs. They were the primary architects of the modern anti-bioterrorism defense system. The American branch of the company was the core of this movement. They used the remaining assets and the intellectual property of the original organization to build a new foundation. They were no longer a pharmaceutical giant focused on profit. They were a specialized containment force focused on survival. The employees were veterans of the Spencer era who had seen the horror firsthand. They were motivated by a sense of institutional guilt that drove their work. They were the researchers of the second chance. In 2007, the company was officially recognized as a legal entity by the United States government. They were granted a limited license to operate in domestic and international zones. This was a controversial decision that led to a massive debate in the UN. Many nations were afraid that the vipers were being allowed back into the grass. Blue Umbrella had to operate with a level of transparency that was unprecedented in the industry. Every lab and every file was open to international inspection. The founding of the company was the start of a new and complicated relationship between the corporation and the heroes. Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine were forced to work with the very people who had once hunted them. This tension is the defining characteristic of the Blue Umbrella era. It is a story of atonement and distrust, a battle for the soul of a brand that was built on a foundation of corpses. The Blue Umbrella was opened in the hope that it could finally protect the world from the rain. Part 53, Genuine Atonement or Corporate PR. What Blue Umbrella claimed to be and whether it was true. The central question surrounding Blue Umbrella is whether their mission is one of genuine atonement or a massive act of corporate PR. The company claims to be dedicated to the eradication of the biological threat, but their origins and their methods remain a source of doubt. Sure, they provide the BSAA with advanced technology like the Thor's hammer weapon system and specialized anti-regenerative ammunition. This tech is designed specifically to kill the monsters they once built. It is a clinical act of destroying their own legacy. Many survivors, including Chris Redfield, believe that the company is simply waiting for a chance to restart their research into the prehistoric fire. They see the Blue Era as a temporary stage in a much longer corporate cycle. The technology they provide is so advanced that it suggests they are still conducting high-level biological experiments in secret. You cannot build a better weapon without first understanding the better monster. This logic keeps the BSAA in a state of constant suspicion. They are partners who are always watching each other's hands. The company's leadership consists of former high-level managers who managed to avoid the initial bankruptcy trials. These individuals have a deep knowledge of the Spencer vision and the viral market. While they claim to have rejected the eugenics dream, their personal ambitions are still a variable. They are the survivors of a house of vipers, and they know how to navigate the corridors of power. The atonement might be a legal strategy to protect their remaining influence in the pharmaceutical industry. However, the results in the field suggest a level of success that is difficult to ignore. Blue Umbrella has provided the logistics for some of the most dangerous containment operations in the 1910s. They have saved thousands of lives through their vaccine research and their rapid response teams. For many people, the results are more important than the motivations. They see the company as a necessary evil in a world of constant bioterrorism. The Blue Umbrella is the only thing standing between the public and the virus. The company's transparency is also a point of contention. While they allow UN auditors into their labs, there are still classified projects that are hidden behind national security laws. This lack of total honesty is what fuels the theories of a secret agenda. Blue Umbrella might be building a new kind of monopoly based on the control of the anti-BOW technology. They want to be the only ones with the power to kill the monsters they created. It is a business model built on the management of a global crisis. As of 2026, the truth remains an enigma. The company has stayed clean for nearly 20 years. But the shadow of the Spencer era is long. Every new outbreak is a test of their loyalty and their mission. Whether they are the heroes of a new age or the villains of the next chapter is the biggest question in the franchise. The Blue Umbrella is a symbol of a world that is trying to forgive itself, but one that is too afraid to forget. The vipers are still in the grass, and the grass is now blue. Part 54. The Baker House Incident and Chris Redfield. How Blue Umbrella positioned itself as an anti-BOW force. The 2017 incident in Louisiana was the definitive moment for Blue Umbrella to prove its value. The company provided the tactical and logistical support for the mission to contain the molded outbreak at the Baker House. They deployed a specialized unit led by Chris Redfield, she using their advanced tech to neutralize the fungal infection. This was the first time the company had operated so openly in a domestic zone. They positioned themselves as the ultimate anti-BOW force, capable of handling a new and unknown threat. During the mission, the company showcased their anti-regenerative ammunition, designed specifically to kill organisms with a high healing factor. This tech was essential for the defeat of the E-Series asset and the containment of the mold. Blue Umbrella demonstrated that they had moved beyond the old T-virus research to focus on the modern biological syndicate known as the Connections. They were the experts who provided the tools for the heroes to win. They were the shield of the 1910s. Chris Redfield's involvement was a tactical move to gain public and professional trust. If the legendary hero of Raccoon City was willing to work with the company, then the world could perhaps start to believe in the blue logo. However, Chris remained deeply skeptical of his employers throughout the operation. He used his own unit and his own intelligence to ensure that the company did not steal the viral samples for themselves. He was a commander who was always looking for the betrayal. The Baker House incident proved that Blue Umbrella possessed a level of intelligence that surpassed the BSAA. They knew about the mold and the syndicate before the agency was even alerted to the danger. This suggests that their network of former employees is still active in the global shadows. They are the ones who have the keys to the laboratory, and they know where the secrets are buried. The company used the incident to cement their position as the primary technical partner for the global anti-bioterrorism effort. The fallout of the mission was a public victory for the company. They were credited with preventing a major domestic disaster and securing the biological asset. The blue logo was seen on every news broadcast, representing a new era of corporate responsibility. Blue Umbrella had successfully used the tragedy of the Baker family to rewrite their own history. They were the cleaners who were now trusted to manage the most dangerous materials on the planet. The atonement seemed to be working in the eyes of the public. However, the incident also raised new questions about the company's real activities. Where did they get the data on the mold? How did they develop the specific ammunition so quickly? These are the doubts that continue to haunt the relationship between Chris and the corporation. The Baker House was a laboratory for the new era of biological warfare. It was the place where the Blue Umbrella was tested against the dark fire. The results were successful, but the cost of trust was still too high to pay. Part 55, The Village Discovery, the BSAA Soldier, with the BOW and what it implied about Blue Umbrella's real activities. The 2021 incident in Eastern Europe provided a shocking revelation that changed the narrative of the biological war. Chris Redfield discovered that a BSAA soldier deployed to the village was actually a biological machine, a BOW asset dressed in a tactical uniform. This discovery implied that the legendary agency had been corrupted from within. At the same time, it suggested that Blue Umbrella might be the only ones who are still actually fighting the monsters. The roles of the hero and the corporation had been reversed in the snow. The existence of a biological soldier within the BSAA is a direct violation of every international law and anti-bioterrorism treaty. It suggests that the agency is now producing the very weapons it was founded to destroy. This corruption is likely the work of the regional directors who have been influenced by the remnants of the original organization. In this dark landscape, Blue Umbrella appears to be the only entity with the tech and the will to expose the truth. They have become the good guys by default in a world of corrupted heroes. Chris's discovery has led to a total breakdown of trust between his unit and the agency headquarters. He is now operating as a rogue commander, using Blue Umbrella's logistics to hunt down the rot within the BSAA. The company is providing him with the intelligence and the gear needed to fight a war on two fronts. This partnership is the ultimate irony of the Spencer legacy. The man who dedicated his life to destroying the company is now its most important tactical asset. The Vipers and the Hunters are now brothers in arms. This shift in the power dynamic implies that Blue Umbrella has been playing a very long game. By providing the agency with technology and funding for 20 years, they have become the indispensable backbone of the global defense. They have successfully waited for the heroes to fail so they could emerge as the only stable authority. The corruption of the BSAA might even be a result of the company's own influence. A calculated move to dismantle the competition. The Vipers are always one step ahead of the hunt. The village incident also proved that the biological threat is becoming more domestic and more hidden. The ancient megamycete and the mold are being harvested by the very people who were supposed to contain them. Blue Umbrella is the only one who has the technical knowledge to fight these new organisms. They have positioned themselves as the final line of defense for the human race. The Blue Umbrella is now the only thing protecting the world from the viral reign of the 1990s. It is a world of absolute moral ambiguity. As of 2026, the situation remains in a state of crisis. The world is watching as the BSAA collapses into scandal and civil war. Blue Umbrella is standing by, ready to take over the responsibility for global security. They have successfully reclaimed the name and the authority of their original founder. The company that started the war is now the one that is expected to end it. The discovery in the village was the final piece of a puzzle that has been 30 years in the making. The giant is back, and the color is blue. Part 56. The Umbrella. Name in 2026. What Resident Evil 9 added to the legacy of a corporation that was supposed to be dead. In 2026, the name Umbrella is no longer just the title of a company. It is a permanent legacy of failure and biological terror. The events of Resident Evil 9 have confirmed that the red and white logo is a ghost that will never truly be buried. The organization has become a myth that haunts the dreams of every survivor. Even with the original founders dead and the company dissolved, the ideology of the eugenics dream continues to influence the global elite. The Umbrella is a symbol of a world that was broken by its own ambition. The current era has shown that the biological fire is now a permanent part of the human story. The Progenitor virus and its derivatives are everywhere, from the black market to the government laboratories. The organization proved that the prehistoric fire could be managed for power, and that lesson has been learned by every major syndicate and nation. The legacy of the 1966 expedition is the world we live in today. We are a species that is always one vial away from extinction. The Umbrella is the only thing we have to hold on to. Whether Blue Umbrella stays clean or falls into the same eugenics trap as Spencer remains the biggest question of the current decade. The company has the power and the tech to rule the world through the management of the biohazard. They are the new architects of the biological future, and their moral compass is still unconfirmed. They could be the saviors of the race or the next generation of monsters. The shadow of the past is always hanging over their headquarters. The Vipers are still in the grass, and the grass is still blue. The name Umbrella in 2026 is also a record of the heroes who fought to stop the fire. Chris, Jill, Leon, and Claire are the living proof that the human spirit can survive the corporate madness. Their lives have been defined by the struggle against the red and white logo. They are the survivors of a war that has lasted for 30 years. The organization's greatest failure was its inability to account for the courage of the people it tried to evolve. The human element is the only variable that the giant could never control. Ultimately, the story of the corporation is a cautionary tale about the price of godhood. It shows that you cannot build a better human by destroying humanity. The founders traded the world for a chance to live forever, and they ended up with a legacy of ash and mutation. The organization was a masterpiece of biological engineering that lacked a soul. It was a giant that fell because it was built on a foundation of betrayal and greed. The umbrella is a brand of shame that will never be erased from the history books. As the series moves forward into the future, the ghost of the organization will continue to haunt the narrative. Every new virus and every new monster is a child of the original research. The world of Resident Evil 9 is a world that was built by the organization, a world of constant crisis and biological fear. The company might be dead, but the fire is still burning in the shadows. The umbrella is still open, and the rain is still falling. The final chapter has not been written yet. The Vipers are waiting for the next rain.